If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who drive late at night, have you ever seen a scary unknown creature, UFO, or had a strange experience on haunted forest roads or highways? Share your story.
Need help identifying something I saw while driving. This happened less than an hour ago. While driving back from a town in the West Midlands, UK, my friend and I turned a corner and saw an 8-foot pitch black figure, with thick arms and legs about 100 meters down the road. It walked on its hind legs into the road before disappearing into the hedgerow. As we went past, I saw from my peripherals that the thing's head was towering over the hedge by at least 2 feet, and I could literally feel that it was looking at me. There is nothing that fits this description in the UK. It was massive and walked on its hind legs. My friend and I felt a wave of fear, and the eyes of my friend, who was driving, started to well up. Please help me identify this creature or give me any information. I'm still feeling shaken from this. Aboriginal spirit? My partner and I were driving home on a dirt road through the bush. We live in rural NSW, with our 9-month-old son. My partner all of a sudden says she could see something strange. I looked up and saw a tall shadow-like figure run across the road, dissolving before it left our view. It didn't seem to be one of those instances where our headlights were illuminating shadows on the moving landscape, kind of like a dark solid mass. I saw something similar out of our back window one morning as I prepared to leave for work. No features, just dense black and fleeting. As children, my siblings saw similar things, and I have heard other people tell similar stories. Out in the place we live now, both my partner and I seem to be becoming more sensitive to spirit. I wonder if it has anything to do with my distant Aboriginal heritage? The figures seen are similar to indigenous Australian rock paintings. Very magical and on the fringe between our place and the dream time, perhaps? Does anybody have similar stories? I was driving down a deserted, very dark, rural highway in West Virginia near Parkersburg one night at about 10 p.m. I saw a white light off to my left keeping up with me. It was a ways off the road, kind of behind the few trees that were next to the highway. I thought I remembered there were railroad tracks over there, so I just assumed it was a train. After a while, it seemed as if it turned and came toward me. I didn't remember a railroad crossing and didn't see one now. The object sped up and flew right over my car as I slammed on the brakes. It was silent. It flew off to my right and disappeared. I tried to drive and heard something odd. Got out. All my tires were flat. Had to flag down a truck, like 15 minutes later, to drive into town and get a tow. This was the 80s, there were no cell phones yet. This happened 25 years ago, just outside of my small hometown in Texas. It was early morning, between 8 and 8:30. I had just left my hometown, driving NW on a 2-lane country road. I had only traveled a few miles and knew I was coming up on some very high cattails. They had been there for years, on the right side of the road. As I approached and got within about 50 meters, I saw a huge, black, hairy, bipedal creature enter the cattails. I saw the right side of the creature, and I estimate it was somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. I only saw it for a couple of seconds before it entered the cattails, but it could not be mistaken for any other animal, and it was too big to be a person. Once I got past that spot, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the cattails swaying from something moving through them. Many years ago, I was driving back from a village pub with a friend, down a very long country lane, when we passed a young woman who looked distressed. Looking back, the bizarre thing is that everything was pitch black except for my headlights, yet this woman stood out due to her brightness. This was the 80s, and she was wearing typical 80s bright clothes, so I thought nothing of it. There weren't any houses for miles, and this was before mobile phones. We decided to stop the car, turn around, and see if she was okay. Drove back up this lane. Bear in mind this is an open lane with no tree cover or drainage ditches, and we had turned round only a few hundred yards after passing her. No sign of her. No other cars had passed us, and there was nowhere she could have turned off or gone. My friend and I were both confused. Got to the next turning point about 2 miles down, went back along the same road, and still no sign. If I were on my own, I would have sworn I'd imagined it, but both my friend and I saw it. I was driving through a narrow road at around 2 in the morning. This occurred after I finished my late shift at the hospital, during which a car crash happened, and someone needed immediate surgery. Okay, now back to the road. This road was surrounded by trees, and I was used to hearing crickets, but this time it was extremely quiet. My immediate thought was a skinwalker because I love spooky stories, but I told myself to stop being ridiculous as I was scaring myself. All of a sudden a terrible smell hit me, and I closed all the windows to help with the smell of what was before me. At this point, the only thing I could think about was a skinwalker, but I tried to rationalize that it was probably just a dead deer or moose causing the odor. This next part happens very fast, so be ready. As I was going down the road, a hunched wolf was sitting right in front of my headlight. My heart skipped 5 beats, and then I remembered all the stories I read. One of my favorites was from Entropic Society, and I knew the creature was not a wolf because it was huge. Its legs looked like they were smashed by boulders and reattached. Its head snapped to me on one side, and its head was tilted to its right. What confirmed my fear was when it stood up to be 8 feet tall, stared into my soul with its yellow eyes, and slowly crept toward me with its human hands. I drove right into that thing and knocked it down, barely giving me enough time to go through that tiny gap the giant monster left. As I made it through the gap, my wing mirrors collapsed in because of how narrow it was. Okay, this bit makes me tremble as I write it down. It started to run faster than my car. I tried to go full throttle, but ramming into the skinwalker messed up the front part of my car. I was so close to the city I could see the street lights and a few drunkies beside trash. At the last moment it gripped onto the back of my car, and its nails penetrated the roof of my ceiling. Now I was just leaving the forest when it jumped off and stared at me through the mirror inside of the car. I made it home and just didn't speak to my brother or my sister and went to sleep. The next morning I told my story to my brother, who guaranteed I saw a skinwalker. This happened 4 months ago, and now I take a route that adds 20 minutes to my drive, but it's better than that cursed route. 3 of my friends were driving home from Mardi Gras. We had a 15-hour drive through the night and had to take shifts. We had 2 cars because we arrived separately, but we're headed back together. The group consisted of 3 drivers and 2 cars. We were driving from New Orleans to Charleston and had to be on several more rural backroads. While I was driving solo, I was going through a patch of fog, not super heavy, but there were no street lights and it was the middle of the night. I see this patch of fog in front of me, and as I get closer, it looks like a silhouette of a human right in the middle of the road. As I got closer, the fog spread with the single patch of human-shaped fog in front, about 10 feet. I'm driving at highway speeds, but as it touches my bumper, I can clearly see an old lady, and then everything goes in slow motion. The image of the old lady is like a ghost. She slowly passes through my car and makes direct eye contact as she phases through the entire car. Her head turned slowly, making it so I could see her through the car and then in the rearview mirror as she disappeared back into the fog. Obviously a hallucination from being tired. I called the other car right behind me and told them what I saw. They didn't see anything, not even the fog. Needless to say, it was time to pull over. I still remember it vividly. A dark apparition in the middle of a road. Hi, tonight I've been driving from my boyfriend's house back home. It's not a long ride, but it's the suburbs, which means the road is old and there are woods all around it. I took the same road I always take, so I am very familiar with it. It was around 1 a.m., approximately 10 minutes ago. When I was driving down this dirt path, with a small clearance of woods all around it, I saw something standing in the middle of the road. At first I thought it was a deer, but the closer I got, the more wrong it looked. It was tall and black, so it was uncomfortable to look at. It wore a long coat and a black fedora, and everything was just a little bit too long, its limbs and body. The more I looked at it, though, the more depressed I felt. It was like a sixth sense was screaming at me that I will die. I drove past it, and when I looked in the back mirror, it wasn't there at all. Needless to say, I drove home like a maniac, covering the distance that usually takes about 20 minutes in just 10 minutes. I am scared. What have I seen? Could it be a lost soul? I am prone to feeling energy, but I have never seen it. An explanation would be kind. Thank you all. Badlands National Park. I recently moved to South Dakota for work, and last week my coworkers and I decided to drive down to Badlands National Park in an attempt to catch the aurora borealis. It didn't end up showing up, unfortunately. We arrived around 8 p.m. and remained there until 1 a.m., during which time it was completely dark. Everything was fine until 4 of us decided to take one of our cars to look at a herd of bison that usually hung out several miles down the road. We didn't end up finding any, save for a couple of stray bulls, but that's beside the point. We ended up turning around to rejoin the others, and on the way back we saw something strange. Well, more accurately, everyone but me saw it. This is a recurring theme and part of the reason I hesitated to share this story. However, while I cannot back it up myself, multiple people saw the same thing at different times, without discussing it with each other, and their reactions seemed genuine. As we sped over a hill, the other 3 people in the car with me started freaking out. They began asking one another if anyone else had seen what they observed and confirming exactly what it was that they had spotted. They all agreed, a tall, pale pink humanoid figure had sprinted across the road in front of us, almost too fast to see. I was skeptical, and if this had been the only sighting, I would honestly have thought nothing of it. The others were still a bit freaked out though, for the entire rest of the drive. Once we'd rejoined the rest of our classmates, things seemed normal for about an hour. We were just hanging out, looking at the stars and enjoying each other's company. However, a car drove down one of the roads near us, and the person next to me stared at the car and went, "Holy shit. What's that?" She kept her gaze on it and relayed it to us afterwards. Please note, we hadn't talked about what we saw in the car once we arrived back at the campsite. She said she had seen the same figure sprinting across the street in front of the other car and had kept an eye on it in the dark. She also stated it had moved so fast it had traveled down the road in a mere few seconds. At this point, we were all thoroughly creeped out. The people who'd been in the car with me relayed our story about the figure that ran in front of our car. They agreed that they'd seen the same being, and we all kept our eyes out for the rest of the time we were there. I do intend to head back there sometime, against my best instincts, perhaps, to see if I can catch a glimpse of it myself, and I'll update this if I ever end up doing so. I have always had a very deep respect for native spirituality. And in all of my learning about different traditions and important figures, I never thought I could ever come into contact with a piece of it. I never considered the possibility that these animals could be shapeshifters until I recently mentioned it to my brother, who suggested that they might be. I grew up in the central mountains of Idaho, in between several big mining towns from the late 1800s. Having lived here for most of my life, I am familiar with the wildlife and what I would typically see during each season, except for a few encounters that I still can't complain about. My dad, Grandpa, and I went out early to find scrap wood. It was about 7 or 8 in the morning, and we were on a tiny dirt path, miles away from any houses. And as we are driving, we turn a corner to see an animal sitting in the middle of the road. I would say that it was about the size of a large dog but hunched close to the ground and completely black. It had a long tail that dragged on the ground, and when we pulled up, it turned to look at us and had a small head with either small ears or no ears. I couldn't see anything specific. After it saw us, it hopped off the trail into the bushes on the side of the road. Believe me when I tell you this. I have never in my life seen an animal that looked like this. We were all confused. One other time, I was out riding my ATV at around sunset. I was by myself on some trails that I knew well. I decided to explore a bit and took a different path, and suddenly it started to go up a steep hill with lots of washout. As I stopped to try and turn around, the scariest looking bird I had ever seen ran in front of me across the trail. While there are many wild chickens and turkeys, this creature was about the size of a chicken but appeared to have its body oriented backwards or to be standing upright, looking very skinny and unlike any bird I had seen before. I could not see any visible wings, but it had a longer neck, and its head was bare like a turkey's or a vulture's might be. I completed my turn and quickly drove back home. I don't know much of the native tribes that would have inhabited this area before the gold rush, but I do know that a lot of violence and death happened because of it, with the historical cemetery having over 100 unmarked graves. If anyone might be able to confirm or deny my theory, I would really appreciate it. The I-90 rest area on the Montana/Idaho border was haunted. It was approximately 3 to 4 a.m., and I was on my way to Portland. I saw one of my straps was loose, and I had to pee. Pulled into the rest area, and there was one lone truck there, curtains pulled, assuming they were sleeping, and no other vehicles in the parking area. I hop out, fix the strap, and turn to walk inside to pee. Immediately notice I'm suddenly cold when before I wasn't. Didn't think much of it, it was early spring after all. Looking towards the rest area, I see a shadowy figure in the window that disappears off to the side after I glance at it. I remember thinking, that dude in the other truck must have gone inside to piss, and I was just seeing the reflection of him in the glass. I open the door of the rest area, and everything is dead quiet, like you could have heard a pin drop. Still tired as all hell, I entered one of the individual bathrooms. This rest area is weird and has a bunch of individual bathrooms with locking doors. As I'm at the urinal doing my business, I hear someone pull the locked door hard as if someone were checking to see if someone was in the bathroom. At first I was annoyed, because I had literally just walked into the bathroom seconds earlier. It was then it hit me that something weird was afoot. I heard what sounded like a janitorial cart or something rattling outside in the common area, and then suddenly every toilet in the place started flushing one after the other. I quickly finished my business at the urinal and reached to unlock the bathroom door. And immediately all the toilets stopped, and everything was dead quiet again. I was pretty freaked out at this point but still wanted to know what the hell was the cause of all this, so I quickly opened the door and peeked my head outside in the common area. Nobody there. I even looked in the different bathroom stalls for an explanation. Never heard any footsteps of someone that would have been easy to hear with how quiet this place was. So at this point I was freaking out because of the literal poltergeist-like shit going on, and I made a hasty exit back towards my truck. As I was heading back to my truck along the sidewalk, one of the streetlights I was underneath shut off. Keep in mind it was like 3 to 4 a.m., and there was no way this light should be randomly turning off. I dead-ass sprinted back to my truck and hopped in, locked the door, and took a second to calm down. Grabbed my phone. No signal at all. I immediately turned the truck on and hit the road again. I'll piss myself before I stop there ever again. Grew up in a small Texas town surrounded by farm and ranch land. As I was en route to see a girlfriend, hormone-raging teen, in the next town over, I hit something in the road. It is incredibly dark on this particular highway, and there is nothing for a good 5 to 10 miles in each direction. I pulled off the county road to check my Jeep, and out of the corner of my eye saw someone walking towards me very quickly and quietly. The only reason I was able to see this person was due to my hazard lights catching him in the light momentarily. I got back in my vehicle like my life depended on it and was scared out of my mind. Thinking back, whatever I hit in the road was a planned attempt to get someone to stop. Needless to say, I started hunting in my backyard. Shadow figure seen while driving at night. I was driving on a small motorway that goes through mainly fields at around 1 a.m. a while ago. I had 2 friends in the car with me. We were driving on a part of the motorway where there are only fields on either side. There are some houses about a 45-minute walk away, but there's no reason someone should be out there. We sped past what looked like a 6-foot-tall man standing in the middle of the right lane doing nothing, literally just standing still. I could only see him for a split second because I had my dipped headlights on and there were no streetlights on the road. He didn't get lit up by my lights at all. He was pitch black. All I could see was a silhouette. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was looking into the car as we passed by. After all, who wouldn't look at a car? I got quite a fright and shouted, then turned down the music. Both friends asked me what was wrong, and I told them there was someone standing in the middle of the road and that I could have hit them. Neither friend saw the person. My girlfriend was looking out the right window as it happened and also said nothing was there. It obviously made me feel really uneasy, but I snapped out of that feeling and went straight back to normal about 30 seconds later as if nothing had happened. Could this have been something paranormal? Or was it maybe just someone crossing the road? I find it really strange for someone to be crossing the road there at that time of night, but it's always a possibility. Twilight Zone Turnpike? I recently read about a paranormal event that happened near my location in Annie Wilder's Trucker Ghost Stories and Other True Tales of Haunted Highways, Weird Encounters, and Legends of the Road. It took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1979. The long and short of it is that a man was driving home from the movie theater during a storm. He ended up in a part of town he didn't recognize with road names he'd never seen in town before. In his words, nothing seemed even remotely familiar in a way that is hard to describe. Los Angeles simply doesn't look like Cincinnati. And this didn't look like Pittsburgh. After about a half hour of driving, he found a sign for the PA Turnpike and got on it. He drove on this for about 20 minutes. It was deserted, no cars at all. Even the toll booths didn't have attendants. After going through the toll booths, he had to make a right or a left and made a left, finding a street that he knew, but it shouldn't be there. Well, it took him back home. 15 years later at a conference in Los Angeles, the speaker had told a story similar to it. I'm looking for people who have had similar experiences and where. I'm in Delaware, and I plan to try and find these places so I can record my experiences there. Any help is appreciated. There is a road that connects my town to the next town over, which goes over a mountain. The road climbs to a height of approximately 3,000 feet before descending again. It takes approximately 45 minutes to drive if you are familiar with the route. It may take longer if you are not. There are lots of turnouts on the road and a few campsites but no houses. One night, while returning home after a concert around 2 a.m., my boyfriend was asleep in the passenger seat, and I was driving leisurely since there was nobody around. Suddenly, a car was tailgating me. I hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere or come close until they were super close to me and blinding me with their brights in my rearview mirror. At the first turnout I see, I pull over to let them pass, and they seem to disappear. They didn't pass me, but I couldn't see them behind me in the turnout. So I figured maybe they turned on a side road I didn't see, I don't know. I was trying not to scare myself. I get back on the road, and within 5 minutes they are right behind me again. I pull over, and the same thing happens. They just disappear. So now I am thinking maybe they are ducking with me by turning their headlights off, although I don't know what kind of crazy person would do that on a dark windy road. Once more, after a few minutes, they are right behind me on the road. This time, I wait until I'm almost down the mountain and see some streetlights before I turn off the road while watching them in my rearview mirror. They do not pull over with me, instead, they seem to continue driving, but as soon as they disappear from my mirror, they are gone. I have no explanations, I can only guess it was something paranormal or extraterrestrial. Entity under my car. This was a few months back when I was still hanging out with a couple of friends, around the middle of May, and we were all old enough to be out by ourselves at almost midnight. We went to a movie, and it was around 11 p.m. by the time we got out. I was the designated driver for the night and needed to bring my friends home. I'll call them K and A. I lived a couple of miles out of town in a rural area, so I decided to drive them home first, then drop K off at their place. Everything goes well on the ride there. We're talking about the movie and listening to music. We drop A off at their house and then start making our way back. While rounding a corner to turn on the main road, I got this awful feeling in the pit of my stomach. I would have dismissed it as something else, such as sleep deprivation or hunger, since I had only eaten a small popcorn at the movies. However, Kay mentioned experiencing the same feeling around the same time I did. A few seconds later, a loud thump comes from underneath my car. We both heard it, too. At first I thought I had hit a rock or an animal, but then the thumps kept happening like someone was banging their fist on the underside of my car. That's when I became terrified. The feeling only got worse to the point I was shaking and could barely keep my hands steady. We were both freaking out by this point. I sped up in hopes of getting rid of whatever was with us. I wasn't going to risk pulling over and checking for whatever was there. Kay decides that, instead of immediately dropping them off, I bring them with me, call my grandmother, who I was living with at the time, and inform her of what was going on. They dial the number for me, and I explain the situation as best as I can. My grandmother is standing on the porch waiting for me, looking quite disgruntled by the time I arrive around 11:45. I'm scared to get out of my car, but I came to the conclusion I have to brave it and face the situation, or else I was going to remain in the seat for the rest of the night. I grab my car's door handle and go to open it, but something tells me to look out the window first. I do. That's when I see it. Some sort of creature was standing just a couple of yards away in the field next to my house, staring at me. It was misshapen, and it looked almost humanoid, but I couldn't make out its features due to how dark it was. I knew for a fact it wasn't friendly, though. I blinked and it was gone. My shaking got worse, and I looked over at Kay, who had also seen it and was looking at me in fear. Apparently, my grandmother hadn't seen anything and chalked the noise up to my charger block banging on my car while I was driving since it had gotten caught in the door earlier. Needless to say, I wasn't able to sleep much that night. My friends and I all stayed up on Snapchat with each other in the group chat talking about what happened, and A had explained they had seen similar things out their bedroom window. I swear to this day something had latched itself underneath my car and followed me home. I never saw the creature or anything like it again, but I'm more cautious when driving on roads at night. Drove on a freeway that I can't find. With no other cars and no surroundings. Today, while out with some friends, we discussed a strange experience that has been haunting me ever since. The occurrence happened a few months ago, after me and two friends, I'll refer to them as A and J. We were driving home to Marietta, California, after attending a Dodgers game. Along the way we missed an exit and got lost around San Dimas and took this opportunity to pull off and get McDonald's. Thereafter, we got back into our car, and the GPS recalibrated our route to take us through some surface streets to reach an on-ramp. It was at about 2, and there were no cars, which we thought was normal considering the time. As we kept driving, we still hadn't seen any cars, even while on this freeway, which we still don't know where it is. We did not see any cars until we arrived in Corona.
While talking tonight, A, J, and I realized that some strange occurrences on that road have been seriously troubling me.
First off, I'd like to mention that A and I mutually agree and remember these events with no parts missing from either of our recounts. First off, while we were on that road, none of us remember seeing any lanes going in the opposite direction. We both also recall driving on a single lane road. Secondly, the road was completely dark, surrounded only by a drop-off to our left and a hill to our right. And thirdly, we kept seeing freeway ends here signs over and over again until we remembered being in Corona. But perhaps the scariest thing that I and A both recall is that J was never there that entire duration. Regardless, this is freaking me out, and I need to know if I ended up in the Twilight Zone. If anyone has information, please respond. The man on the road. As a child I liked to be into creepy stuff like watching horror movies or playing games like Ouija, but what I saw that night was too scary. Throwback, it was night. I was only 12 years old when my family decided to go to the beach. It was so boring for me that I begged them to stay at home. Anyway, we reached the beach and spent at least 5 hours continuously playing with my cousins when my mother's voice called out, "Everyone, come over here, we need to leave because of the approaching storm." We packed our things, and we got in the car. The storm has begun. It was raining heavily, and the lightning was innumerable. However, in the middle of the road, inside a little forest, we saw a man standing on the side. It was winter, and we were winter swimmers. The man was wearing a t-shirt, a cap, and shorts. His face was dull, and we couldn't see anything of his characteristics. We all got goosebumps that moment. We said hello a couple of times, but he didn't answer. It was so cold outside the car that it was impossible for someone to stay out with summer clothing. A kilometer later, we saw an old lady who told us that the man had been dead since her childhood. Silence. And he has been standing there every day and every night since then. We asked her how he died, and she described the scene to us. It was summer, a group of tourists came to Greece for vacation. One of them, the man, was walking through the forest when lightning hit him. He died instantaneously, and since then, every night he has been making his comeback. A man allegedly witnesses numerous types of entities. The incident occurred near Naugatuck, Connecticut, on January 3, 2004, late at night. The witness was driving on State Road 68 west and up a lonely hill when his headlights caught sight of a strange creature running into the woods. He stopped his car and looked at the creature, which resembled a walking tree in 2 shades of brown. Its head had a beak like a bird with many protruding teeth and a strange crest-like protrusion on top of it. Terrified, the witness quickly drove home. The following week, while driving on the same hill, the witness saw another strange creature, thin in color and glowing green. The head was like a lizard, and on its back it carried something resembling a backpack, which had a transparent canister filled with the glowing green liquid. The creature briefly walked towards the witness up an embankment but stopped and disappeared into the woods. As it did, the strange creature appeared to turn transparent. Soon after, the witness drove up the same hill, and his windshield suddenly went dark. Something was on the hood obstructing his sight. It was a creature with many white square teeth. He also saw the creature's feet, which appeared sinewy and gray in color. The creature then jumped from the hood and started walking alongside the road. It had extremely long arms that seemed to drag on the ground. The creature stopped and began to gesture with its long arms. At this point the witness noticed a similar creature sitting on the ground staring at the witness. The eyes of the creatures were black and the size of a grapefruit, and both had large pointy ears. A strong white light suddenly illuminated the area, leading the witness to believe another creature was approaching from behind. He drove on for about 50 feet and then looked back and again saw the bizarre, bird-like creature standing on the road looking at him. It was 6 foot tall with square patches of red and yellow on it. The witness eventually drove away without looking back. I've been fascinated by skinwalker type crap since I first heard of them, and I'd say this definitely belongs here. Neither of these stories is mine but was told to me independently by people in different settings, my brother-in-law and my friend, neither of whom hangs out with the other. Both stories entail driving through remote areas late at night. First, my brother-in-law. A few years ago, my brother-in-law was riding in his friend's truck just past his friend's house, where woods line both sides of the road. Suddenly, something appears in the oncoming lane far ahead, and it looks like a tall person walking at night. However, as they get a little closer, they realize it is actually a muscular deer with a wolfish body standing on 2 legs, which then looks at them with red glowing eyes before sprinting like a human into the woods on the other side of the road. I'm pretty sure he said they got scared, ha ha. After he told me this story, I told him about skinwalkers. Later, while I was hanging out with him and his friend, the topic came up again, and his friend said, "You know, I've thought about it, and after seeing this nature show, I'm pretty sure it was a bear, and we just overreacted. Because we were pretty ducking tired." My brother-in-law said, "It wasn't a bear, friend." His friend said, "Bears don't look like we think they do. They're out in the woods and they get dirty and their hair gets all scraggly and close to their bodies, so they look really thin." My brother-in-law said, "It ran like a man." His friend said, "Bears go up on their hind legs all the time." My brother-in-law said, "But they waddle, they don't run like a man. With their arms pumping back and forth like a runner. It had antlers, friend." His friend, who was now laughing, covered his eyes and exclaimed, "Oh God. Shut up. Stop reminding me. I had just gotten convinced it was a bear. I want IT to be a bear because I live out there." My brother-in-law said, "It wasn't a bear, friend." And they dropped it and refocused on playing Elder Scrolls. Now the one from my friend. Once, while he and a group of people, 2 of whom I know and 2 I don't, were driving home late one night from an event. They saw woods on the left side of the road and wide pastures on the right, bordered by thick stumpy posts with rows of metal wires running between them. The friend who told me this was likely smoking weed, but at least one of my other friends who was in the passenger seat does not at all, so whether they were smoking or not, he at least was sober. My friend is driving, and I believe he mentioned that a girl in the backseat asked, "What is that?" They noticed that one of the posts in the field ahead is taller than the others. They're looking at it, then realize, wait, that's a dude in a hood. My friend said it was like a kind of hunchback person wearing a dark robe with the hood up standing on the post. What the duck? Where we come from, the answer to so many questions is tweakers. But then, it turned its head slightly, revealing a huge, thick beak protruding from the front of the hood, and my friend in the passenger seat bolted forward, pointing out the windshield and exclaiming, "What the duck is that? What is that?" As they all freak out and get even closer, the creature leans towards the road, spreads its huge dark wings, and flies across the road into the dense trees. My passenger seat friend goes, "Nope. And starts rolling up his window, which I think is a manual. They're all just freaking out and the driver's like, "Roll up all the windows. Lock all the doors." My friend in the passenger seat is shouting steadily, "What the duck was that? Oh Jesus." As they well exceed the speed limit on this empty road, which I think he said they haven't gone near since. That's what I remember of the two stories, but I find them both very intriguing, and just due to how I read people, I'm pretty inclined to believe both people were not making it up for giggles. Anyway, I hope you find it fascinating too. July of 2014. I was en route home after a 2-week vacation. I was alone, towing a fifth-wheel camper with my pickup truck. It was about 10:30 on a Saturday night, and I was approximately 2 hours away from home, planning to arrive that night. I was on a stretch of 2-lane road in Wisconsin that has very few houses on a 30-mile long road. It is wooded on both sides with shallow sloping ditches that are mowed by the county. It is fenced at the tree line. There is only one combination bar, restaurant, motel, and campground along this whole barren road. I was already driving a little under the speed limit, as deer were out a lot that night. I saw movement up ahead on the right shoulder, and assuming it to be more deer, I slowed way down. As I passed by, I realized that the figure was a woman. She was tall and lean, with long brunette hair, wearing a white crop top shirt, a blue plaid pleated skirt, and knee-high stockings. Honestly, it looked like a Halloween outfit. Walking with the traffic, I saw her from behind, just off of the shoulder in the short grass. I immediately assumed a car breakdown or a fight with her and that she had been put out, as she was miles from any house or business. I pulled over to a stop, hit the flashers, took a flashlight, and went to see if she was alright. When I got to the rear of the camper, there was no one there. She could not have made it through the ditch, over the fence, and into the woods in the time it took me to get to the rear of the camper. I was far enough ahead that she could not have made it to the rear of the camper before me. I walked back to where she had been, and I saw no sign that the heavy dew in the grass had been disturbed. She had just vanished into thin air without a trace that she had ever been there. I made the rest of the trip home with the hair on my neck standing on end. I wish I had a dash cam back then. I'd opened my tattoo shop 30 minutes or so from my home, so there were many late nights coming home. The entire ride home was pretty dark and very rural. I had always experienced a profound sense of unease while traveling along a particular road. After approximately 8 months of making this journey, I observed what appeared to be a solid black dog or wolf, but larger than usual. Despite its cliched appearance, the creature was incredibly dark, akin to the depths of the night. I watched it run through the yard, like an inky shadow, for 10 to 15 seconds. At this point I'll add, no drinking or drugs. We had to cross a state line and go through very common roadblock areas, so it wasn't even an option, but it was late, maybe midnight. When I get home, I tell my wife about it, and we both chalk it up to it being late, me being tired, and it being a long day. A few months later, a buddy from the shop and I were heading back to my house much earlier, around 9 p.m., again without drinking or drugs. We hit the same road, and I instantly get an uneasy feeling. We hit a slight curve and slow down, and sure enough, there it is again, the same thing. My buddy goes, "Holy ducking crap, what the duck is that?" Or something to that effect, as this thing runs past the car in the opposite direction, passing on the driver's side. I immediately respond, "Don't say anything, don't tell me what it looked like to you." I won't say anything either, just ask my wife when we get to my house what I saw on this road. Sure enough, 20 minutes later we're sitting at the kitchen table confirming the stories with each other and my wife. I continued to travel that road for about a year and never saw it again. Something in the road. A few years ago, I had a miscarriage. I was devastated and was grieving. My husband and I visited my in-laws one night. They lived in a rural area with few streetlights. It was a typical fall night, and we stayed at their place until around midnight. It was a clear night. No rain, no mist, no fog. Just a clear, cool fall night. Since it was late and there were so few people that lived in that area, the roads were deserted. It was just us alone on the road. All of a sudden, my husband and I both saw something in the middle of the road in front of us. He slammed on the brakes at the exact same moment that I yelled, "Watch out!" In the middle of the road was what looked like a dog or wolf. It was in the form of a white mist, but it was definitely there in front of us, and we definitely both saw it at the same moment. We had looked at each other in disbelief, and when we turned back, it had vanished. I said to him, "Did you see that too?" He described seeing a transparent white dog that appeared out of nowhere. I only saw half the dog/wolf, the front half. We had no explanation for how we both saw the same thing at the same time or how it had vanished into thin air. We were very freaked out the rest of the way home that night. We were afraid it was some sort of bad omen, but nothing bad happened. I've often wondered if it was related to the miscarriage I had shortly before that and was maybe a sign of some kind. Unexplained encounter. So can anyone explain this to me? I and my family were driving home one day through a section of the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee. We were coming around a curve when a deer was standing in the middle of the road. We slammed on the brakes, but the longer I and my dad looked at it, something just felt off about it. Its legs were weird looking, and it had eyes that faced forward. No deer I've ever seen looked like this. My dad thought it was a deer with something wrong, like a disease. I mean, deer can get diseases that can make them have deformed limbs, but something felt off. My point was proven when it stood up. I have never seen a deer do that. I grew up in the mountains and had never seen anything like it. Then it hopped off the road, and when I say off the road, I mean it climbed an almost vertical slope. We looked up and saw it just staring at us from the top of the cliff, and then it ran off. Please, someone explain this to me, please. Unknown humanoid spotted in Vancouver. Hey guys. So last night I was driving home around 3 a.m., and I passed by a suburban intersection, looked left, looked right, and turned back and, wait, what? For a fraction of a second I saw a humanoid creature sitting cross-legged, hunched over with its back towards me. It was bald and hairless all over. I couldn't reverse to have a second look because there was a car a few paces behind me, but I watched it turn right, and the driver just kept going as if nothing was there. After a slight hesitation, I got out of my car to check the scene, and it was nowhere to be seen. Does anyone have any ideas what I might have spotted? Middle of the highway at night. My wife and I were driving down a rural highway. There are 2 lanes in each direction, and in between the 2 directions of traffic is a median that's 50+ feet wide. As in there's quite the separation between my direction of traffic and the oncoming traffic. The landscape around this highway is all desert. Occasionally you pass through a smaller town, but in this particular stretch you're not even close to anything. Other roads, exits, houses, towns, any lights besides your headlights, etc. My wife and I had the sunroof open and music turned up, going about 80 miles per hour. We're cruising along, no cars directly in front of us, when all of a sudden I jump, swerve to the right, and honk my horn. The reason I did so is because a man was full on sprinting not a foot outside of my lane. So on the very outskirts of this median. He wasn't running in a way that was for leisure or for exercise, he was running in the way you would if you were running to reach something quickly or running to get away from something quickly. My initial reaction, which caused me to jerk to the right and honk, was, WTF, why is this guy out here in the middle of nowhere at night? But my second thought was, okay, I definitely saw blue jeans. Not a dark wash, definitely a medium or light wash. I also saw a plain, no logo light gray hoodie. Very similar to the kind I bought at H&M years back. Here's the thing, there was no face. And this isn't a case of oh, there's his head, but his face is blank with no features. It looked like somebody did it from behind when they were wearing a hoodie with the hood up. Like, we all know that a head is under there, but all we see is the hood from behind. That's what I saw for this guy's face/head. And he was obviously running towards us. It's definitely my first odd experience like this and is not something that I have any explanation for. As for my wife, she was vaping and literally in the act of blowing the smoke out of the sunroof. She didn't have her eyes on the road, but she reacted when I swerved and honked. I grew up in North County, San Diego. I don't live there anymore, but this story pertains to the road leading through Lake Hodges, a reservoir and hiking spot in Escondido, California. It's a gorgeous but spooky area. The lake is surrounded by sleepy canyons filled with yapping coyotes and old farmhouses spread out among big lots. There are barely any streetlights on the residential streets cradling the lake. The lake itself has some dark history only locals might know. A high school girl got ended while jogging along the main trail when I was around the same age. My best friend's sister and her friend found voodoo dolls and knives stuck to some oak trees along the trail once. Creepy shit. San Diego looks nothing like the Deep South, but Lake Hodges has a similar complex about it. It feels like something unspeakable has happened there. When I was in high school, around 2009 to 2011, my friends and I would drive around and smoke cigarettes. We listened to new music and had existential, adolescent conversations. Often, we would drive around at night. I believe the first time this happened was in late winter of 2010. We were driving down the windy road, past the point separating the dam from the rest of the lake. As we were about to turn a corner, we saw this figure of a tall man standing on the side of the road. He had his thumb up, looking to hitchhike. His hair was wet and black, and the best adjective I can conjure for him is slimy. He was wearing this wet trench coat, and his face was wan. When our headlights met his eyes, they looked vacant yet melancholy, staring off into space like a zombie. But still, there was something soulful about them. I can't explain it, and it's been over a decade, so I've had plenty of time to reflect on the strange sorrow I witnessed in him. Anyway, he vaguely resembled a drowned pirate, and we were all terrified. A few months later, same thing. We saw the same figure hitchhiking a bit further down the road. This time, we were even more mortified. A hitchhiker in the same place in the same clothes twice? A year or so later, I had returned from college for spring break and was catching up with my same friend, barreling down the road. Somehow, the topic of the hitchhiker came up. My friend told me that she had just seen him again recently, at a different spot down the same road at night. We commented on how we knew he was a ghost, or just, not human. My main questions are still, why would a hitchhiker always be looking for a ride along the same road? Always at night, and seemingly only in the early part of the year? And how the hell is it so obvious he's dead? Happy spooky cozy season. What did he see? I hope that someone will give me an answer. Saturday night, 2015, I and my boyfriend were traveling northbound from St. Luis Obispo, California. We were taking Highway 1. For those not from the area, it's a very rural and mountainous area that is adjacent to the ocean and about 200 plus miles away from San Francisco. On Saturday night the moon was full, so there was plenty of natural light. The area is filled with campsites and motels, making it a popular tourist destination. However, despite visiting many times, I have never encountered anything. Not even coyotes or raccoons. That night, as we passed through a city or park called Grenade, it was late, about 11 p.m., and both my boyfriend and I were falling asleep. He was the one driving. Just before we almost fell asleep, a coyote ran across the road and sobered us up out of it. We were completely woken up now. We figured it was chasing a little fox we'd seen about 100 feet back. About 2 miles after, we saw 2 other coyotes next to a left side turnout. I want to make this picture as clear as possible for you so you don't think we are crazy. I was falling asleep again after about 10 minutes, but I didn't want my boyfriend to doze off, so I forced myself to stay awake for safety. He told me that he was okay and that it was fine for me to shut my eyes, which I did. Mind you, I still had some adrenaline from my first encounter with the coyote. I remember the air right before I shut my eyes was musty, like old clothing, and I mention this because we both commented on it. But nevertheless, I shut my eyes for no more than a minute. Then out of nowhere my boyfriend screamed holy shit and was driving dangerously fast. I opened my eyes, and my boyfriend says, "Oh my god." I asked him what the duck is so important that you scream and scare the shit out of me. The following is a direct quote, "Jesus, I just saw a monkey carrying off a coyote under his arm." Me, what? Boyfriend, I just saw a chimpanzee carry off a dead coyote under his right arm. It had dark black matted fur and long arms, and it was carrying off a coyote. It was on your side of the car. Me, it had to be a person. Boyfriend, no. It was a monkey. It was about 4 feet tall with long arms and black hair. The high beam was right on it. Me, who the duck would have a chimp out here? Boyfriend, it might be someone's pet that got out. Me, you can't keep those kinds of animals here, it's illegal as hell. Boyfriend, you know this area is rich as duck. People can ignore the law. Me, we haven't seen a house for 50 miles. We went on to argue about what he saw for a good hour, but for the rest of the trip back he was hypervigilant. I want to make it very clear that my eyes were closed and I didn't see anything. My boyfriend has glasses and has poor vision at night. However, the moon was completely full, and his high beams were on. Anyone could see, no matter what the conditions. After doing my little research, I found out in 2009 that there were reports of an ape taking small animals in the area of Trinity, a city no more than about 25 miles away from our area. But the Trinity reports were all classic Bigfoot. Please, if you have ever seen or heard of something like this, please tell me. The only other creature that fits his description is a devil monkey, which is only found in Northern California or the Midwest. Please help, any information you can provide would be appreciated. What did I see? This encounter has been on my mind for some time, and I'm looking for some answers or information. I was 16 when this happened. My older cousin, who was 19 at the time, and I were coming back from a family party, so our spirits were high even though it was 2 in the morning. On our route home there is a very long road that is expansive. On both sides there are tall trees, not something you'd call a forest, but dense enough that it creates darkness on each side. However, on the left side there is a thin strip of sidewalk, and on the right the sidewalk is wider, so wide you could probably drive down it. We were just having a heart-to-heart talking about various things like traveling, our family, and generally what we want our future to be like. We weren't driving fast at all because we didn't really want to go home. I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Not knowing what it was, I turned to look out my window, but I couldn't see anything. In my gut, I felt something was off, and a wave of sadness came over me for no specific reason. I just felt like crying. I was about to ask my cousin if he was alright, but when I looked up, I saw a figure run from the left side of the sidewalk to the right. It scared me so much because I've never seen anything like this before. It resembled a human, but I knew it couldn't be one because it was extremely tall and skinny, with long, thin arms. My cousin slammed on the brakes, and I realized that he had also seen what I just saw. Wanting to know what it was, I looked to the right side, and I was utterly confused. A man on the right sidewalk was sitting there next to his bike. He looked at us and smiled. He was wearing cycling gear, and his bike was on the floor. I was shocked and confused. Why would he be cycling at 2 in the morning? I crawled over the console and leaned over my cousin so my face was right up to the window. I stared at the man as he smiled back at me, but his smile had changed. It was so wide and toothy. He looked normal but so out of place. As I examined him more, I noticed he only had one ear, and where it should be was totally flat, but everything else was just what you'd expect a human to look like. The man stood up, and my cousin pulled me away from the window and back into my seat. He drove off so fast I didn't even have time to look through the mirrors to look back at the man. I tried to talk to my cousin about it that night and various other times, but he just snaps at me, telling me to drop that topic and never to mention it around him again. I know what I saw, but at the same time I have no clue what it is. I would be grateful for any information you could provide. This has only happened once in my life, and it was a very surreal/frightening experience. A few years ago, my sister and I were driving on a back road home from the cinema one night when a car's bright headlights suddenly appeared out of nowhere on a long stretch of empty road behind us. Figuring it might just be some local asshole tailing us, I slowed down so they could pass. They did not pass. The car was so close to us, and their high beams were on, nearly blinding my vision completely. This vehicle ended up right behind my car, following us for 5 minutes. I can't explain why, but my sister and I felt like we were in danger. When my turn came up, I sped up to get away before sharply turning down my road, worried that the vehicle might rear-end me. This car was so damn close that there's no way I could have missed it passing me in my rearview mirror. However, halfway through my turn, it just went completely dark again with no indication that anything was there. A strange experience and one that I find a little unnerving whenever I think about it too long. Both my sister and I still can't explain it. I was 17 at the time and had just gotten my driver's license. I'm originally from Southern California, and my mother wanted to visit an Orthodox Christian monastery in the Arizona desert. It's decently far from any major city. She wanted to let me drive there to improve my driving skills and also decided we should leave at night, around 7 p.m., because this was July, and temperatures on these roads were 100+ degrees during the day. We were going to stay with her friends that she'd known since college, who owned a property close to the monastery. This is where it gets weird. For most of the drive, it's very uneventful, and it's just driving on highways. Eventually we branch off from the main road down a smaller road that leads to the community near the church. At this point, we were approximately 45 to 50 minutes away from our destination, having driven for 5 hours, and we felt quite tired. We were the only car on the road, and it was dark out, impossible to see more than 20 feet. We stopped at a three-way intersection because a truck on the other side appeared to need to turn and had the right of way, but it was completely stopped with one headlight on and the other off, presumably broken. The first weird thing that happened was that the radio in our car, which was on, suddenly began to become very distorted right before getting to this intersection, although it had been perfectly clear at every point up until now. I also noticed that the truck had no front license plate. When I drove beyond it, I saw the most horrifying thing in my life. The person in the driver's seat had no eyes, just black hollow sockets, and their facial proportions were completely wrong. Their neck was very elongated, and their mouth was open, which was also completely black all the way down to a level that would not be possible for a normal human. It was like it was screaming. Its skin looked fake too, like it was wearing a human mask, and there was a sudden chill in the air as soon as I looked at it, and I felt like I was in the presence of a great evil. I slammed the gas pedal and took off at 100 miles per hour for a few minutes, and my mom saw the same thing I did, and we were both damn close to shitting our pants. We eventually reached the place where my mom's friends stayed and told them about it, and they said that strange things happen in the desert at night, and it's better not to pay too much attention. I have not encountered a similar experience since, and whenever I reflect upon it, I continue to feel a sense of chills. I lost time during the drive. Years ago I worked a 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift and would have about a 40-minute drive home. The ride home was mostly highway and it was the same trip I'd taken for the last 2 years or so. During one of these trips, I was driving for about 15 to 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I was in a residential neighborhood with no idea where I was. I never stopped driving, 1 minute on the highway and the next minute lost in this neighborhood. I would always arrive home at roughly 11:45 to 11:50 p.m., and it was now 12:49 a.m. I saw a sign for the highway, and I turned out to be only about 6 minutes or so off course. I was still roughly 30 minutes from home, and nothing else happened during the trip. To this day, I have no memory of leaving the highway that night, nor do I have any memory of what happened during that drive. My father saw a ghost on the side of the road. So in 2019, my family was driving back from Narrabeen when we drove on Wakehurst Parkway. There is a legend of the road where a lady in all white is on it, and if you're not careful, she can appear in your car. So we were driving back at around 9 p.m., and we were in the thick bush area. My mother, brother, sister, and I were asleep. My father was all alone. According to him, I was driving back. Plus, he has heard of the stories his friends told him. I was driving when I saw a lady in all white standing on the side of the road. I freaked out but continued to drive. However, I saw the same lady, 2 minutes later, on the same side of the road. My father told us he was so freaked out, he tried to drive faster. 2 minutes later, the same lady. After we got home, he told us. Personally, I couldn't sleep for a night or so. So, yeah. The time my partner and I almost fell for it. To preface this, I should note that my partner is part native. His mother is half native, and his father is a direct descendant of an important tribe member. I have no idea what my heritage is, and I've never cared enough to investigate. What I'm saying is, I have no culture, and I would rather not talk too much about my partner's heritage because I wouldn't do it justice, though honestly neither would he, as he and his sister were never part of a Reese community, and I'm pretty sure their whole immediate family has been separated from it for a while. What I will go into detail about is what we saw, what happened, and how we got away. Honestly, I don't remember exactly what we were going out for that night. It might have been cigarettes, or maybe we were craving fast food, but it was nearly 2 years ago now, so why exactly we ended up where we did isn't clear in my memory anymore. It was quite late at night, possibly around midnight or a little later. We left our apartment and drove down the back roads that lead to town. Our apartment is tucked pretty high up on a hill in the woods. This is backwoods WV, so take that as you will, and there are 3 windy dirt roads next to a huge creek system that you have to go down to get onto the main road. This will be important later. The drive started out normal enough. We weren't really talking or listening to music, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. At that point we had been together for 3 years, and sometimes you just don't have much to talk about. I started playing on my phone. I think I was looking at Facebook, but I'm not sure. I heard what I believe to be my partner whispering, but he has a tendency to mumble thoughts he cannot retain in his mind, such as trivial responses he should have provided earlier in the day, so I did not pay it much attention. I kept hearing it, though, and it sounded like the same thing over and over. Obviously that worried me because at that point it wasn't a habit, it was a mental health crisis, so I turned to look at him. At that moment everything stopped, and I can't really explain what I saw, but think of it like a black shadow that doesn't have a form. It's ambiguous, but despite that, you know it's humanoid, and you can almost make out the body and features if you try. That's what I saw, quick as a flash, through the driver's side window. As soon as I saw it and went to say something, my boyfriend slammed on the brakes. This next part is a little hazy, but I remember he couldn't seem to formulate a thought for a few minutes. He just kept gaping his mouth open at me while I asked him what was wrong. There wasn't anything in front of us, and I kept asking him why he had slammed on the brakes. Finally he said something to the effect of, "All these lights are distracting me." I thought I saw a grim reaper crossing the road. I am sure he said it more elegantly and with significantly less nonchalance than that, but that's the best paraphrase I have. Sure enough, as I looked around, the creek bank on the driver's side and the rock face on the passenger's side actually looked like they were sparkling. Like even though it was the middle of the night, it looked like someone had covered the grass and water with glitter and shined a huge spotlight on it. My partner said it was like that the whole time until he finally stopped, but like I said, I was playing on my phone and didn't notice until he did stop. I am not sure how long we sat there, but the next thing we both agree with remembering is wanting to get out of the car. We both had a strong desire to get out of the car. I think at one point I even rolled down my window just to be a little closer to that glittering hillside. The whispering hadn't stopped, and I didn't think about it until much later, but my partner has since told me he wasn't making any sound at all and that he heard it too. It wasn't words, really, either. It was, but it wasn't. At the time we were staring in that trance, we both knew what was being said, and we know that now, but it just sounds like noise in my head when I think about it. Like I said earlier, time was lost to us, and I don't know what would have happened if we would have gotten out, but my partner said he knew in his gut to stay in the car and that he had to keep driving. So that's what he did. This all happened near the end of the second road, and by the time we got to the main road, we had finally calmed down enough to talk about it. My partner told me he could see the same shadowy creature I did the entire time, but he had a feeling in his gut that if he talked or told me, something bad would happen. He said he just kept looking forward and driving until we came to the section of road we finally stopped on. Apparently he didn't want to stop, but to him the weird lights on the hillside were so bright they were blinding, and when he could see again, it looked like there was a skinny, hooded man standing in the middle of the road. He said when he finally did stop, he couldn't talk to me because the man was watching him and stretched across the road, in front of us, and off into the woods. To this day we don't know what it was, but if it was what we think it was, then I'm glad that something deep inside of him just kept telling him to pretend it was fine. I had an experience years ago. I was driving eastbound on I-4, in the vicinity of the Mid-Florida Amphitheater. It was dark, probably around 9 or 10 p.m., when a young woman came out of nowhere and walked out onto the road directly in front of me. I was going about 65 miles per hour, maybe faster. I knew beyond a doubt that I was going to hit her. I could see her very clearly in my headlights, light-skinned, white or Latina, with dark hair. She walked as though she were in a daze. As I braced for impact. Nothing. Nothing. No thud, bump, blood, nothing. She simply vanished as my front bumper touched her. I had slammed on the brakes and looked around to be certain. There was nothing whatsoever in the road or on the median. It was incredibly scary and one of my first experiences as an adult. GPS kept taking me back to my randonaut location point. Just a quick one that happened the other day. I've been randonauting to randomly generated locations to walk a bit with my sick dog for a few months. The other day we were on the way to a spot, driving, at dusk, I know. I had set the intention of peace and healing or something. It was dark by the time we arrived, and as I was about to turn the last little corner to see the spot, I stopped because I immediately felt creeped out. It was an extremely dark, woodsy corner that I couldn't really see past. I got this overwhelming feeling of dread, like I was being naively summoned into the trap of turning this corner only for something to go terribly wrong. I wondered if I was just imagining things, but the feeling of doom became so overwhelming that I literally U-turned it out of there like a madwoman, my poor dog flinging around the backseat. I entered my home into GPS and was driving for a bit until I realized I was headed the wrong way. Zoomed the maps out and saw it was actually now taking me back to the creepy randonaut corner that I never turned. This happened, I kid you not, 2 more times before I finally recognized where I was and just got home with my own sense of direction. This type of situation had never occurred during my previous adventures with my dog. I realize it could have all just been an Apple Maps bug, but, paired with the eerie experience, I was sufficiently creeped the duck out. So much for peace and healing. Mile marker lady. Here's a story that was told to me by my ex-husband, and if memory serves me correctly, it happened to his ex-stepmother's stepfather, who I'll call Tom. Try wrapping your brain around that. Anyway, here's his story. Years ago, Tom was working at a job, I can't remember where he would oftentimes work late. So it wasn't unusual for him to be driving home late at night. As you know, highways are littered with mile markers, and Louisiana was no exception. One night while driving home, he noticed a lady wearing a white dress standing near mile marker 5, I can't remember the exact number, and although he felt bad for the lady, he didn't stop. She was beautiful with her long flowing hair, and the dress she was wearing reminded him of one of those dresses from the 1800s. He continued to drive and noticed that each time he passed a new mile marker, he would see the lady in white standing there. Naturally, this creeped him out, so he stepped on the gas, not once slowing down, so I guess you could say he put the pedal to the metal. However, just before he reached the next mile marker, he glanced into his rearview mirror and was shocked to see the lady in white sitting in the back seat, her face now wearing a malicious expression that quickly twisted into something hideous. As he rapidly approached mile marker 8, he began to hear evil laughter echoing throughout his car, but he ignored it, even though he was terrified, and continued driving. Apparently, she began to wail like a banshee because he was getting away. Eventually, she vanished from his car, but what was to follow was even scarier. He then saw movement off to his right, and what he saw, he would never forget. It was the same lady in white chasing him, but this time it was just her disembodied head that was cackling like a witch. The head also seemed to be getting bigger and at times would make its appearance inside his car, scaring him even more. The head began to weave in and out of Tom's car while continuing to pursue him, maintaining the same pace as the vehicle until they finally reached mile marker 9, at which point it vanished. Needless to say, he didn't hang around long and made it home in record time. Oh, in case you're wondering, Tom continued to take that same highway for 20 or so more years until he retired but never experienced the lady in white again. Anyway, for some reason when I think about this story, it reminds me of the short story in Creepshow 2 about the hitchhiker, and I always feel compelled to say to myself, thanks for the ride, lady. Quite a few. I've definitely seen shadows of people sitting in my back seats reflected in the mirror, and while driving through a particular forest, I have noticed what I can only assume is some strange effect caused by humidity in headlights, which creates ghost-like figures floating above the car. I know it's just a weird trick of the light, but it's still uneasy. I also had a very strange experience one night while delivering pizzas. My local area has a particular centuries-old road that involves a sudden steep drop to the left followed by a sharp right uphill past a small sandstone wall. This bend should not be taken at more than 30 miles per hour, and it also has a ghost story around it about a rich Victorian woman who apparently hung herself from the tree above the wall, whose ghost haunts the corner. Although I don't believe the story, it still gives me a sense of unease. Well, this particular night I was very sleep deprived and had my manager on my arse about delivery times, so I was speeding. It's one of those roads that's the national speed limit but only because it's a backwoods single track. I was doing roughly 60 to 70 miles per hour and didn't realize I was approaching the bend, as I'd missed the farm on the left-hand side that signals you're close. I somehow made it around that corner and parked in a lay-by a few hundred meters past it. However, I have absolutely no memory of doing it. I just remember going too fast, a sandstone wall, and a lay-by. Lost in the mountains. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. If any of you have been in Utah, you may know that it's famous for its mountains. People ski, snowboard, mountain bike, etc. My parents were big bikers, and I had never gone. I was in 4th grade, so my dad thought it would be a good idea to take my older 2 siblings, me, and my younger sister biking. However, the only issue was that my younger sister did not have a bike, even though she desperately wanted to join us. So hesitantly my dad allowed her to walk alongside him on his bike. So we were riding along having a good time when we came to a big hill. My older siblings were tired of going slow with the rest of the group. My dad and sister led the way, leaving me behind. I wanted to go fast too, and so I told him I was going ahead alone. He warned me that there was a fork in the trail and that I needed to go left, not right. I dismissed his warning and sped ahead. Pretty soon I came to the split, and I couldn't remember which way to turn. I heard bikers on the right, so without thinking, I went down. Immediately the trail became really rough and rocky. I just held onto the handlebars and continued on. I came to a very tight turn and couldn't control my bike. My chain broke, and so my brakes wouldn't work. I had a little kid bike. I was going so fast I hit a rock and flew off my bike. My hands and knees jammed into sharp rocks, and my bike was broken. That's when I realized I was alone and couldn't see or hear anyone around. Unfortunately, I got up and walked my bike down the trail in hopes of finding someone. About 15 minutes later, with no one in sight and the sun beginning to go down, I sat on a rock and sobbed. I didn't know where I was, and I was sure my family had already returned home without me. I was scared of mountain lions because this was usually the time they came out to hunt. So again, a dumb decision. I kept moving farther away from the right trail and saw a biker. He had a motorcycle helmet and was going on the jumps on the trail. He saw me, and I thought he was going to stop and help since there was an 8-year-old alone on the trail. Nope. He kept going, and so did I. I kept walking and crying up the mountain until I was too tired to walk. I put my head in my hands and cried and prayed that I would be okay. Then I heard a loud voice shout my name in the distance. I yelled, "I'm over here." Back. The voice became louder and louder until I saw my dad turn the corner and ride towards me. I dropped my bike and ran to him crying. He told me that I had gone down the hardest, most complex trail on the mountain. Oops. When we got to the car, I was met with 4 crying siblings. They all hugged me and told me they were so worried. Apparently my dad had told them I fell off a cliff. Nice one, Dad. The end. Glowing eyes and time loss. After work last night, our crew finished a job at a barn just east of the town we reside in. After the job, it's natural for the other crew members in the van to fall asleep and me, the passenger up front, and the driver, in the driver's seat, also the supervisor, to stay awake and talk as we head back to our houses. Well, we left the job at around 2:30 a.m., and the location was maybe 15 minutes from our hometown on the east side. We were out in the country on rural roads, and we saw the very large raccoon creature in the ditch with eyes illuminating the grass around it. Naturally, the supervisor slowed down and asked what that was, and I said it looked like a very large raccoon, but its eyes were glowing. I immediately got goosebumps, and we both noted the glowing eyes. We kept driving for what felt like maybe 10 minutes, and we ended up at a dead end and had to make a left turn. Keep in mind we've been to this job site before, so we both know the route to arrive back home. After turning left, I noticed how different the roads appeared compared to our usual route, and we continued driving until we unexpectedly found ourselves 20 minutes outside of our hometown on the west side. I was looking around and said, "Wow, we're really far from hometown. We are coming to the roundabout," which was on the far west side of town. The supervisor said, "I know, what the hell?" And I said, "No, we're really far, and it only felt like we were driving for 10 minutes, and he said, "Right? That's what I'm saying." We both joked about how we had the time loss right after the so-called creature, but we kind of seriously considered that the creature caused us to have a time loss of about 20 minutes or so. We were wide awake and weren't distracted, and my Google timeline shows that we just drove straight on the back roads and hit the dead end on the far west side of town in the countryside. Has anyone experienced anything like this, or does anyone have an explanation that can help me sleep at night? 2 kids spotted a creature, and later, 1 kid ended up missing. Location: Randfontein, Gauteng, South Africa, April 18, 2000, 6 p.m. The witness and his mother were driving to the local pharmacy when suddenly he saw a very bright light right next to the car. He tapped his mother on the shoulder to get her attention. The light was disc-shaped and stayed with the car for a few minutes until they decided to stop underneath a streetlight to look at it. The light suddenly shot away at incredible speed. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. Around the same time, 2 teenage boys had been walking in the street, possibly the previous night, when they spotted a strange creature following them. It seemed to walk on 4 legs, and it moved very fast. Both boys ran with the creature closely behind them. They noticed that it seemed to shy away from the streetlights. Once they noticed this, they stood still under a streetlight while the creature waited in the dark for a while. It then disappeared. When the boys got home, they told the parents what happened. The next morning one of the teenagers was reported missing from his home. A search was conducted, but to this date his whereabouts remain unknown. I saw a Sasquatch in northern New Hampshire. For the past 5 years, I've thought about this day close to once a week. I figured I should just share my experience at this point. To start, I'm from southern NH but was staying at my friend's family cabin located in Coos County. There were 10+ people staying there. The majority of the group preferred to go shooting at a sandpit located further along the road, but my girlfriend and I were not particularly interested in that activity, so we decided to remain behind. One of our friends offered for us to join him because he had planned to go fly fishing solo. My girlfriend and I had just seen some moose up in Pittsburgh, so we told him we should go moosing on the way over. Sighting starts here. We were driving down back roads to get to the fishing spot, driving pretty slow so we could also peep into the tree line from the road. Out of nowhere my buddy slams on the brakes, and we all scream Sasquatch at the same time. What we saw was a 7-foot giant hairy ape/humanoid walking across the road in the blink of an eye and into the tree line on the side of the road. It all happened in probably 2 seconds. The outline of this thing was just like you've seen anyone describe. Tall, long arms, hairy, brown. The part that is insane to me is that my friend then drove up to the part of the woods where the thing entered, and there was nothing there. You could even see 100 feet in the woods. The part that really messes with me is that there was a man and his kid in their front yard about 20 yards ahead. We slowly drove by them in absolute shock and looked at them, assuming they just saw the same thing. They just stared at us, so we disengaged with them. My friend turned around on the same road twice, and we saw nothing that indicated a giant hairy man just walked across the road. The three of us freaked out about the incident until we left our friend's camp, and to this day only one person in the other group at the camp believes us. The only footage that I can compare it to is that of the police officer, who sees the same thing on the dashcam with his partner. Blurry footage from what I remember, this thing moved so fast, it seemed like it glided across the road. Before this experience, I had literally never spent a single moment believing or thinking about Sasquatch existing. I still do think that 99% of the footage I've seen is fake, but the three of us know what we saw that day, and I try to never mention it, as I know people will think I'm nuts. My GF has pretty much brought it up to all our closer friends, and I always have to explain the story and just feel stupid. As for my friend, I only see this guy like twice a year when we go to our friend's camp, but we bring it up every time we see each other. He mostly just finds what happened funny and will openly share the story with anyone who asks. I still don't know what to make of this. I feel like there are many people on the internet who are believers for no reason, as there really isn't anything I've seen on the internet that I think is real. My theories about it are these. 1. The three of us all saw a giant being that walked across the road that matches the description of Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, and we'll never know what it was. At this point I don't care if anyone believes me because it's highly unlikely there will ever be footage to back what I saw, and trust me, if you're listening to this, I've shared all the same doubts as you have, such as why no one has killed or captured a Bigfoot. Why hasn't any credible footage been captured yet? How could it even be possible that they elude 99% of people and 100% of satellite or aerial footage, etc., but I cannot explain how three people see the same thing at the same time. Ghost on the road? I was driving home from a later class about 2 weeks ago, and it was raining pretty bad. I wasn't all that tired either. I was about to drive under a small bridge/overpass when I saw a tall, hunched figure that was completely dark. It had jumped out into the road in front of my car. There was no one behind me, so I slammed on my brakes. Within that second nothing was there. I drove off, not fully processing what had happened until the next light. I wanted to cry, I was so afraid I couldn't look into my mirrors either out of fear. I have absolutely loved the paranormal my whole life and have had many experiences, but none were anywhere near that terrifying, and I have no idea what it could have been. Teleported while driving? I don't know whether this is the most interesting story or even the craziest thing that's happened to me, but it certainly freaked out the people involved for a while. It happened about 2 years ago around Christmas time. It was around 10:30 p.m. The girl I was dating at the time lived way out in the country in a small town. We're talking less than 2,000 people. She worked about a 45-minute drive away and didn't drive, so I picked her up when she was off. The road was simple. Although it was twisty and turny with lots of hills, you just follow the road to get there and back, only 3 turns. I picked her up, and we were driving back. At one point, you have to drive through a military base. There is a huge hill that you go up first. As we were driving up the hill, I looked to my left and noticed a house with Christmas lights hung up. My first thought was that it was strange that they had lights up in the base, and then it occurred to me that there were no houses on the base, at least none visible from the road. The house was also very overgrown, to the point it would be difficult to get in the door with all the trees and vines and tall grass. It was also behind a chain link fence. It was so close to the fence that the porch was only a foot or 2 from touching the fence. The fence was probably about 6 feet high with no gate. I pointed it out to my girlfriend. She thought it was weird too. We got to the top of the hill and realized we were nowhere near the base. We ended up on a small back road miles away from the base. Discussed it with some friends when we got back, who said we must have just taken a wrong turn. The next day, in the daytime, we checked out the route, and it couldn't have happened. We would have had to turn a good 5 miles early to get to that road, and it didn't have the giant hill that you go up before the base. I know that I didn't turn early. Like I said, it wasn't a complicated trip. The turn toward the base is very easy to see at night because there's an old building on the corner with an obnoxiously bright blue light. The turn to get on that back road has no lights. I also wasn't tired or zoning out. The route was notorious for lots of deer being around who would jump out. The speed limit was low through the base, and you had to be careful of other servers as well, due to not being able to see over the hill. You had to be alert. Still not really sure what happened there. This happened a few years ago, but I just found this, and it seemed like a good place to share. When heading back from my mom-in-law's one evening with my then wife, along with my 3 daughters, all teenagers at the time, we were on a small road that had a railroad crossing. It was getting dark, with slight misting rain and cool, like early fall. As we approached the track, I always slowed down and looked both ways, even though there were crossguards in place. As I looked to my right before I crossed, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the tracks, about 30 feet away. I wasn't expecting to see someone and had to do a double take. As I looked back, there was no one there. While it was brief, I did get a clear image of what it looked like. A young woman with long, wavy dark hair wore a long white dress that had long sleeves and a white hood or veil over the top of her head. But not like a wedding dress. Just an old-style formal type dress. Her head was slightly tilted forward like she was glancing down, but her eyes were looking up at us as we crossed. And a very neutral expression. Not smiling or frowning or anything else. It was, like I said, very brief, but I got a clear image. At first I thought perhaps it was a light trick due to the damp air or reflection off our windows. Maybe my mind created an image based on all those factors. Until my youngest, who was 16 at the time, spoke up and said, "Did anyone else see someone standing on the railroad tracks?" We both were shocked over this. I asked her to describe what she saw, and she said it was a woman dressed in white with a veil over her head. No one else saw it. Just us two. I'm an artist and still do many sketches. Later I made a sketch of what I saw and didn't say what I was drawing. I just turned it around and held it up and said, "Tell me what you think of this." She screamed and ran out of the room. I have no doubt she saw exactly what I saw. Now I consider myself an open-minded skeptic. Most things can be explained away. We've never figured out what we saw, or why only us two saw it. But it remains an intriguing mystery to us. Ghost semi-truck sighting in a small town in Mexico. So for context, this happened quite a while ago in a small town in a very rural part of Mexico. Personally, I do not live in this small town but in another town a couple of miles away. This town is fairly small, as mentioned, and really only exists because of the big tile factory that was built in the town. This place is also known as a rest stop for many semi-trucks passing through the lonely interstate. So the story goes that years ago, a trucker passing by the town decided to stop by and rest in one of the rest areas. Over time, locals began to recognize the black semi-truck stopping by every other week to rest. On one occasion, the semi-truck was en route to the rest area. A truck going full speed hit the semi on the driver's side. Locals in that area called the police, but being in a rural place, it took a long time for any aid to come to the scene. According to the locals, the collision was such that the truck was basically embedded into the semi's driver's side. Also, the cause of the accident was most likely due to drunk driving. No one in the accident survived. A week after the accident, people in town began to report sightings of a black semi-truck roaming the streets of the town late at night. People in town were shocked because it looked exactly like the one that was completely totaled a week prior. Locals who have witnessed the semi-truck describe it following them and its loud horn occasionally spooking them. Once they arrive at their destination, the semi just idles for a few minutes outside of where they are before speeding off into the dark. Now for my encounter. It was late at night, 2 a.m., and my cousin and I had just left a party in a nearby town. Following the drive back home, we decided to take a shortcut through this town. We figured it would be a quick pass though, and at the time we knew about what had happened in that town. While driving, my cousin had to shit badly, so we stopped at a lonely gas station just down the corner. I stayed in the car while he went inside to do his business. Well, while I was waiting for him, a black semi pulled over to the side of the road next to the gas station. I didn't think much of it because they pass regularly here to get gas and whatnot. But today was weird because it was quiet and we were the only ones there. After a few minutes, I started to get worried because it was just idling and no one came out of the truck, and I also remembered the story of what happened here. Anxious, I texted my cousin to hurry, and 30 seconds later he got out, and I yelled at him to get in the car. I sped out of the lot, and to my horror, the semi followed behind. My cousin, clueless, asked me what was going on, and I told him about the semi trailing behind us. I tried losing it by turning into smaller streets, but the truck was still tailing me. It wasn't until I floored it and took a sharp right, almost hitting a parked car, that I lost the semi. After that I never passed that town before dark. The time my family and I witnessed a UFO on a road trip. It was 2021, and my mother and father were sick of staying inside. The pandemic had made our summer lifeless, and they were always keen on making memories and going on adventures. There was a lake deep in southern Utah that my parents always wanted to visit. Lake Powell. We packed our bags and towed our trailer through the PNW, crossing our way into the Beehive State. We drove for hours on end, only stopping for food and gas. My parents would drive in shifts. Eventually, the sun set over the beautiful desert, turning the sky into a collage of beautiful colors. We came up a different path. It was a shorter ETA than the route we were already on. So, my mother, who was driving at the time, turned the wheel, and we headed up that path. It directed us to a higher elevation point. We passed through mountains and rolling terrain. There was no sign of civilization from that point on. Just us and the desert. Later that evening, the beautiful sky had turned to black. Few stars were out. It was late. At some point, we noticed a few deer crawling up beside the road we were on. My mom would occasionally honk the car horn to scare off any animal from accidentally running into our truck. My dad, sister, cousin, and aunt were sleeping in the back seat. I rolled down my window. It was silent. Not even the crickets were chirping. At the time, this didn't stand out to me. But I felt it was odd nonetheless. My mom's eyes were peeled on the road, and we didn't do much talking. So, I got on my phone and started writing. I'm a screenwriter/director working out of LA. So, I do write in my free time for the most part. We made our way further up the path to an opening. To our left was a canyon. All was pleasant until my mother asked me, "Are those stars?" I looked up from my phone and couldn't see what she was questioning at first. She pointed, and I followed the direction and stumbled on a formation of lights in the sky. It was strange. They weren't like any other that I've seen before. They were rounder, more dense, and even brighter. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a satellite. It was like a fleet. I immediately woke up everyone in the car, just so that my mom and I could validate that what we were seeing was actually there. She and I shouted, "Look!" Suddenly, the formation of stars began to move. They would condense and expand in the space between them, faster than any plane or rocket. Then, in an instant, they flew down to the earth below, disappearing beneath the canyon across from us. That moment in my life has stayed with me for the longest time now. I can't shake it. Feeling of dread near Highway 53, Oregon coast. I, 29, male, was in the car with my girlfriend, also 29, just driving to see if we could find the supposed bandage man near Highway 101 or 53. As we were driving there, we felt this awful, unexplainable, malevolent dread, like if we went anywhere near Highway 53, something terrible might happen. I understand that Highways 26 and 101 are the most talked about, but Highway 53 should seriously be talked about more, as it is crawling with lots of spooky energy. I'm getting spooked just writing this out. My girlfriend told me while she was driving that she felt watched from the woods. We both did, and she saw a face in the windshield. It wasn't like an actual face, like something was there, but she said through the fog she could see a face outlined in her vision, and it looked threatening. It was male, is all she said. She said if we go anywhere near 53, that's what we'd see. Or something worse. She also saw strange lights flicker on and off in the woods like candles when we drove past a stretch of houses and convenience stores. When we pulled into the rest stop and went to the bathroom, we felt the energy die down a little. Upon leaving the rest stop, she asked if I still wanted to chance Highway 53, but I said no. I don't trust it tonight either. So we decided to just head towards Highway 101 instead, still hoping to catch a glimpse of the bandage man. Just to clarify, whatever we were feeling that night was not the bandage man. It felt way more malevolent. It felt evil, to be honest. I was scared the entire drive. Yes, we both like ghost hunting or thrills, but even we have our limits. When we reached the tip of 53 before making a turn, she again asked, "Do you want to chance it?" And I again said no, and she agreed. She also felt glee and excitement from whatever that was hiding on Highway 53, like it wanted us to go in. And when we decided not to, we both heard a screech like something was trying to get our attention or was angry that we weren't turning onto Highway 53. During the rest of the drive near 101, we still felt watched and found comfort whenever we saw other cars, but thankfully nothing else happened. Upon reaching the coast, we breathed easier because we were away from the strange presence that we had both been sensing and hearing. Is the Oregon coast haunted? We both believe that it is. There's definitely a lot of energy out there, and not all of it is benign. In conclusion, Highway 53 should definitely be talked about more, and if you choose to venture there at night, please be careful. It's not just spirits or demons you have to watch out for, it's a very narrow road too. Once you're on it, there's no turning back, you have to drive the entire stretch. It's impossible to make a turnaround in such a narrow space. Have we driven it before? Yes, about 4 months ago, and we did feel watched on the highway, but it was nothing compared to what we felt last night. We didn't want to drive on 53 last night. In fact, we went nowhere near it. It felt evil and wanted to hurt or kill us, and the scariest part was that it knew we were aware of it. Thank you for listening. While randonauting. Earlier this year I moved to rural central Illinois from the suburbs of Austin, Texas. The lack of things to do was really hard for me to adjust to, so I started joining my friends on a classic middle-of-nowhere pastime, going on night drives through backroads. This reminded me of the 2021 phenomenon of the Randonautica app. We began using the app to take us to random anomalies, and it has all been benign spooky fun, taking us to creepy bridges and old churches. Until last night. We thought going out on Friday the 13th would really up the spook factor, but immediately the vibes were different. We had made slight changes to our group, adding a couple of members to join in on the fun, but no matter how much we tried to get lost, we ended up going in circles. On previous drives, we had managed to disappear into the back roads with relative ease and begin our adventure. Another strange thing worth mentioning was that we saw hardly any of the late-night wildlife we typically see on our adventures, and those we did see were either dead or behaving strangely. Instead, we encountered a weirdly high number of dogs, but that isn't even the freakiest part. Here's a play-by-play of the night. We typically like to start the night with a quantum blind spot within the app, which took us to a farmhouse with a car parked out in the field running and accompanied by the silhouettes of two large German shepherds. Before we generated the next anomaly, we drove around a bit more. In this time we encountered another farm dog, this time it chased us barking and ran around our car. Shortly after, we generated our next point, the reason for sharing this. It was an attractor anomaly. We followed my map along paved roads until we reached the closest point possible, but when the road ended, we took a truck path that led us closer to the anomaly. There were no houses nearby, so we weren't too worried about getting caught trespassing. We followed the path down the perimeter of a cornfield and along a creek until we came to a clearing in the trees. We couldn't take the car any further without risking getting stuck, so we got down on foot the rest of the way. However, we just could not seem to get quite within range of the anomaly. The border lined up nearly perfectly with the edge of the cornfield. We tried to get as close as we could, hoping it would be close enough to be in range when we heard the meowing. We tried to trace the sound along the edge of the field but couldn't seem to locate the cat. We shone our flashlights between the stalks but didn't get so much as a flash of fur or eyeshine despite hearing the meows as clear as day. Being cat people, we tried calling out to it, hoping it would emerge from the field, but the meowing grew more infrequent, and a suspicious feeling settled over me. By this time, our anxious driver had begun flashing her headlights at those of us who had chosen to leave the car. I looked into the corn and said, "I'm not going into the corn. This is your last chance to prove to me that you're a real cat and come out here. Otherwise we are going to leave." The cornfield went silent. Good on my word, our small group on foot went back to the car and left. We filled the rest of the group in on our encounter with the cat and continued our adventure. We tried to put some distance between us and that anomaly before beginning a new one. So we began driving around the backroads aimlessly once more. This was when we saw the last dog. It walked almost too slowly out of the perimeter of a cornfield, not unlike the place we had just come from. As we drove past, it stopped in the middle of the street behind our car, and our driver could see it watching us as we drove away. For the rest of the night, people in the group were afflicted with headaches, nausea, and strange pains before we were ultimately driven to call it a night. We had originally planned to stay out until the witching hour, but I began to get the sense that nothing good would come of it. The next morning, today, I and at least one other member of our group slept into the afternoon despite being consistently early risers. So, cryptid people, what do you think? Did we encounter something like a skinwalker? Were we warned by hellhounds? Or was it just a series of normal coincidences that felt spooky given the circumstances that they happened in? Has anyone else experienced something like this? So my story begins about a year ago. I was riding my bike home from work, and while riding through this residential neighborhood, I saw this form standing in the middle of the road. As I move closer to where it's standing, it backs up even further, and this pattern keeps up for about a mile until I pass a stoplight. After passing the stoplight, the figure or shape stood there in the direct middle of the road in front of me. Its body was made of shadows, but it had a full form, and its eyes were a deep scarlet in color. This figure raised its head and opened its mouth to reveal rows of jagged teeth, but I couldn't make out any other features. I was frozen still for what felt like eons until I kicked my bike pedal and scratched my leg when I slipped. I was able to finally get away, but now this figure haunts me. I've seen it at least once a week to twice a week, and no one else sees it. I've spoken to many of my friends, and they just think I'm losing my mind, but I know it's real. If anyone has had any experience with something like this, please let me know. Ghost walking in a field. In daylight. This happened in 1999. I was driving home at around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and it started to drizzle a bit. I took the back roads, which go through some open fields. At one stage I noticed a man, roughly about 100 meters away from me, walking in the middle of the field wearing what looked like a cowboy hat with a stick on his shoulder holding a small sack. As I was looking at him and thinking, what the hell is he doing out there? Within a split second he came right up to my sidecar window, stopped for a second, and then went straight through me and my car. I swerved and nearly hit a power line pole on the side of the road. In shock I looked back in the field and couldn't see anyone there anymore. I continued driving home, and by the time I got home, I had convinced myself I was seeing things and basically forgot about it in a few hours. Later that night I was watching the news, and they reported a dead body found just a few hundred meters from where this happened. That's when it actually hit me. I got goosebumps all over my body and thought, oh my god, what the hell? That image has stayed in my head since then, and I can't forget it. I have had a history of seeing strange things, though, like seeing ghosts, I think, and dreams coming true the next day, etc. Weird. The road that shouldn't exist. I was up north for a trip in my late 20s, 2019. Me, my best friend, and a group of 10 total. 4 cars. Same hotel, and I shared a room with my bestie. Barbecues, bonfires, fishing, the usual stuff you do on a trip like that. But one night, almost everyone went to bed early. My closest friend and I stayed up by a small fire on the beach. It's so dark there, you can't even see the water, you just hear it. Even with a fire burning, it's just black. After an hour or so, we got hungry. Most of the food was in another room, but we were too lazy to wake anyone up. We decided to grab McDonald's. The only one still open was across the Mackinac Bridge in the Upper Peninsula. It was around 2:30 a.m. Crossing the bridge at that hour felt weird. Quiet. Still. There was no traffic, no lights, just the towering structure of the bridge itself. The kind of eerie calm you can't explain. We crossed into the Up, just 2 guys in a truck. No distractions. No intoxication. Just empty roads and the sound of the tires humming over pavement. At first, everything felt fine. Then the GPS got weird. The McDonald's was supposed to be 14 minutes away, but it kept redirecting us. Like it was pulling us deeper and deeper off the main roads. Eventually, we realized we hadn't seen a single car. No intersections. No lights. Just black forest on both sides. And then it told us to turn. The road was barely a road, cracked pavement, only wide enough for the truck by maybe a foot on either side. Cliffs dropped steeply on both sides, so a single wrong move would have sent us tumbling. Still, we took it. Stupid, I know. But we thought it was just some shortcut. We'd be eating in 10 minutes, tops. Less than a minute in, my friend leaned in, yo. The GPS just went all white. It was blank. There were no roads or signals to be found. My phone too. Dead silent. We were alone. No service. Just our headlights are trying to light a road that barely looks real anymore. The pavement was uneven. Covered in dust and dirt. But still oddly deliberate. Like someone had made this stretch look official, just enough to fool someone into taking it. Then the truck jolted violently. We hit something hard. Our bodies lurched. We jumped out, carefully avoiding the edge, and looked underneath. There was a massive boulder, almost entirely buried beneath a thin layer of dirt. It looked as if it had been placed there, hidden. The truck was stuck on top of it. And just ahead of us was a gate. A massive, iron gate. At least 12 or 15 feet high. Double doors. Chained shut. But no offense. No house. Just that gate. No reason for it to exist, and yet there it was. It blocked the road entirely. And the road ended right there. No way through. Just that towering thing in the middle of nowhere. Panic set in. We tried everything. We tried pushing, rocking, and lifting. We used wood as leverage. Nothing worked. We were stranded on a road that didn't belong to anywhere. After nearly an hour, we tried rocking the truck from the inside, in sync. Somehow the engine coughed to life. I floored it in reverse, careful not to go too far or slip off the cliff. But now we had another problem. We had to reverse the entire way out. The distance was half a mile. On a narrow dirt path. In complete blackness. I drove backward, inch by inch, my hands shaking on the wheel. My friend held his flashlight out the window, helping me guide each tire. That's when it happened. We heard it. A laugh, A man's voice, just outside the passenger window. My friend snapped back inside, shut the window, and didn't say a word. He just sat there with his eyes shut. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. We kept going, slowly reversing, afraid that something, or someone, was waiting behind that gate. Watching. Or worse, following us. Then we saw the lights. Dozens of them. Floating through the forest on both sides. Not flashlights. Not headlights. They moved wrong. Some were yellow, some white. And one was a glowing, almost electric blue. Lanterns? My friend whispered. But they weren't. They drifted in patterns. Like a procession. Like watchers. And then came the scream. It wasn't a man. Or a woman. Or an animal. It was all of them and none of them. One voice made of many, echoing across the trees like a warning. It shook the truck. It shook my bones. It didn't sound like it came from lungs. I floored it. Branches tore at the sides of the truck. I didn't care. I just kept going. When the wheels hit pavement, I spun the truck around and peeled out like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. We didn't stop. Not at McDonald's. Not at a gas station. We didn't even speak. The hotel lights never looked so good. But neither of us slept. My friend sat still, staring at the wall. I stood at the window, waiting to see the blue light again. We didn't talk about it until the trip ended. Because what still haunts me isn't what we saw. It's what we nearly found behind that gate. A few years ago I used to have to do a long drive from northern Illinois down to western Kentucky about twice a month. I had gotten to the point where I knew the drive like the back of my hand. Sometimes it was actually a lot better to make the drive early evening and do a bulk of the 9-hour drive through the night, getting me there about 1:30 to 2 a.m. There was no traffic, and during the summer, it was relaxing to drive with all the windows down. After crossing into Kentucky, there were about 2 hours of roads without even highway lights. But like I said, I'd done it so many times before. During one of my recent journeys, I was traveling along that stretch and had my high beams activated. In the distance on my driver's side of the shoulder, I could see what I thought was a deer. I got a little closer and I realized it was a wolf. As I approached, the animal was on all fours, but its back seemed almost level with the roof of my sedan. I thought, holy duck, that thing's huge. Now I'm probably at 80 miles per hour, and I swear we lock eyes. I can feel him looking directly at me. I'm getting closer and closer. Now I can actually see his teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing was an actual animal. Then, as I was probably 50 feet from this thing, about to pass it on the driver's side shoulder, it ducking stood up on two legs, still staring directly into my eyes. I passed it, and for the rest of the drive, I tried to figure out what I had seen or whether I should loop back. I never told anyone that story because most people would say, "Oh, it was late, your mind was messing with you," but still to this day I won't forget how long that stare down was. I can't help but think I didn't catch him by surprise. It felt more like he wanted me to see him, and if he truly wanted to stop me, he had the power to do so. My wife and I saw something, and I have no idea what it could have been. Maybe someone here has seen or knows of something like it. It all happened coming home from a weekend getaway up to Big Sur from Los Angeles along the remote and rugged California coast. It was the middle of February, and there was light but pervasive fog lingering in the wet ocean air. Highway 1 is less traveled this time of year, but not deserted. My wife and I were driving through San Simeon, right below where Hearst Castle is. I have done this drive many times before, and I know the road well. There is always a colony of elephant seals lazing on the beach, and if you are lucky enough, you might see the herd of wild zebras that roam the hillsides that Hearst let loose decades ago. This was something entirely different. Having never actually visited Hearst Castle, we decided we would take a quick drive up the road to where you park and meet the tour buses just to see what was up there, but with no intention of visiting on that particular day. We made a quick loop around the parking lot and made our way down the road back to the highway when I saw two deer bounding away between two hills. I excitedly yelled to my wife for her to look and pointed in the direction of the two deer, and when she did, we both saw what looked like a giant wolf fast on their heels. As soon as we saw the beast, it quickly followed the deer between the two hills and out of sight, but we were both able to get a decent look at it. It was probably about the size of a small horse, and its back stood about 5 feet off the ground. It looked and ran like a wolf. It had thick fur that resembled a coyote's coloring with more of a reddish-brown tint. I have never seen anything like it before, nor have I since then, even though for a time I looked to see if I could find any similar stories from the area. I know Hearst had a zoo up there in his castle's heyday, but I have never seen a wolf that massive. I don't know how those deer fared, but I can't imagine very well. Has anyone ever heard of anything similar in the area or elsewhere? Skinwalker, roadkill. My auntie told me this story. She is from Del Muerto, the northern rim of Canyon de Chelly. Job security and job availability are scarce and almost non-existent on the Navajo Nation. There were no jobs in the nearby communities or towns. Like many residents of the Navajo Nation, she had to find work off the res in border towns. She had been hired by the power plant in Page, Arizona. Depending on the night shift or day shift, she would have to leave home at odd hours to make it to work on time. She explained that she would drive to Page by way of going to Saley, then Lukachukai, then Kienta, and then finally Page. One time she had to leave in the very early morning hours, shortly after midnight. She figured that she would just make it to Page and sleep in her vehicle until her shift started. She owned one of those late 80s, early 90s Astro vans. The ones with the huge bump-it type things on top. It was the definition of a res ride, no AC, busted up. If you drove faster than 60 miles per hour, it would start shaking, etc. She said somewhere on the desolate stretch of desert road between Lukachukai and Monument Valley, she started to feel uneasy. The uneasiness wasn't a slow creeping feeling, it was a sudden surge of anguish. She quickly searched the rearview mirrors and scanned the horizon for other vehicles or streetlights from the NHA housing that speckled the landscape in certain areas. Searching for some type of familiarity to soothe her uneasiness. No luck. She tried turning the knob on the AM/FM radio in search of any form of radio station. Still no luck. As her focus darted onto the roadway from fidgeting with the radio, something caught the corner of her gaze. The headlights illuminated the figure on the shoulder of the pavement. As she drove past the area, she said it smelled like roadkill. Very pungent. She described it as a mountain lion with an unusual silhouette. As she drove past the figure, she realized, in the passenger side rearview mirror, that whatever it was gave way to pursuit. The black mass, with the silhouette of an odd mountain lion, was running alongside the van. She gripped the wheel firmly with sweaty palms and floored the gas pedal. As the van began to accelerate, the wheel started to vibrate turbulently. She watched as the figure fell back, crossed behind the van, and began stalking the driver's side. She began to pray in Navajo. The speedometer indicated that she was reaching 60 miles per hour, a detail she had already come to the conclusion of due to the turbulence of the vehicle. The skinwalker began to pick up speed and start to overtake the vehicle. She didn't want whatever it was to make it to the front of the vehicle. Her explanation was that she didn't want to see what it was in the full beams of the headlights. She figured she would faint or drive off the road if she saw the details of the skinwalker. So as a gut reaction due to the fear, she veered to the left. She hears a giant thud, and the steering wheel jerks out of her hands momentarily, but she safely regains control of the wheel. The loud thud and scraping can be heard along the entire undercarriage of the van. Her logical thought process kicks in. She isn't sure what she hit, but her instincts tell her to slow down and assess the damage made to the van, to check if she can safely make it to Page without incident or leaking fluid. She turns on her hazard lights and parks in the middle of the road. With a bright LED storm light type flashlight, she hesitantly exits the cab of the vehicle. She checks the tires, the grille, and underneath it. Not exactly sure what she was looking for. The smell of roadkill is still very pungent and present. She checks the rear of the vehicle. She is covering her mouth/nose with her sleeve because the smell is awful. Curiosity gets the best of her. She points the flashlight down the roadway. Before the light of the flashlight illuminates whatever she hit, she hears a woman screaming for help. It sounded like an old lady. She said in the middle of the road there was a bloodied mountain lion pelt and a wrinkled, bloody lady. From what she could see, she said the old lady was naked but covered in blood. She said she hauled ass back to the van, still hearing the shrieks of the skinwalker. She said that she yelled something in Navajo that translated to, "That's why you should have just left me alone. You did this to yourself." She makes it to Page with no further incident as the sun is rising. The Jacksonboro Ghost Light. This weekend I was lucky enough to experience the most compelling evidence of the paranormal in my life, and I would absolutely love to share. The Jacksonboro Light is a supposed paranormal activity that occurs on Parker's Ferry Road in Jacksonboro, South Carolina, which is about an hour outside of Charleston. It is said that in the late 19th century, a man, who was a preacher, went out looking for his daughter, who had run away from home. It was at night, and the preacher was said to have carried a lantern. While the man was out looking for his daughter, he was somehow hit by a train that ran through the area. It's said that you can still see the man's spirit wandering on Parker's Ferry Road searching for his lost daughter. My brother, who attended school in the Low Country of South Carolina, visited Parker's Ferry Road once before and recorded a video of his experience. Additionally, His friend from Charleston has gone there a total of 8 times and has seen the light 6 times. The idea is that you're supposed to drive down Parker's Ferry Road, turn around at the old church, head back the way you came, and park your car in the middle of the road. You would then turn off your car and flash your lights 3 times, and then the light would appear. After hearing their stories while visiting Charleston, a group of us decided to make the trip to Jacksonboro and see for ourselves. The following is the journal we wrote immediately after the experience that night. Our windows get foggy as soon as we turn down Parker's Ferry, so we decided to turn off the GoPro we brought to record the light. We pulled up to the church and turned around, stopping 100 yards down the road from it. I turned off the car and flicked my lights 3 times. Nothing happened, so we drove about a quarter mile farther down the road from the church and repeated the process. We waited 5 more minutes, trying to flicker my lights and draw out the ghost. We thought we saw a tiny red light to the right of the streetlight, but nothing noteworthy. Cars approached from behind, so we left, turned onto the main road, and then turned back onto Parker's Ferry to try again. This time we go exactly a quarter mile from the church and a mile from the streetlight after turning around and flickering my brights 3 times. No longer than a minute later, a faint, dull green glow appears off the road to the right about a half mile down the road. We couldn't see the source of the light, but the sickly green glow was clearly visible. The light pulsed on and off for a while before appearing as 2 green orbs stacked on top of each other in the same spot. The orbs disappeared and reappeared closer this time as one bright green light. This light appeared to be swaying/pulsing like a man holding a candle. This light disappeared and reappeared again, even closer, about 20 yards in front of the car, and at this point we are convinced the light must be something unnatural. The light was brightest now and definitely appeared to be carried and swayed. The light disappeared, and a car came down the road behind us. I started my car and began to drive. As we drove, we then saw a small red light, low to the ground and across the street from the streetlight. At first we assumed the red light was a reflection on the road or a mailbox reflector, but as we approached it, it disappeared. This is when a bright light appeared, far down the road. We eventually got close enough to make out that the light was an orb, about 10 feet off the ground. As we drove, the orb did not appear to be moving. However, it held the same distance from us as we moved at 60 miles per hour, kind of like when you're driving in the car and it looks like the moon is moving with you, although you know the moon isn't moving. The orb disappeared and reappeared slightly closer and brighter, again holding its distance while we moved. Finally the orb stopped, and when we thought we were going to hit it, screaming like crazy, it disappeared. That was the last we saw of the light. I saw a ghost truck. So, this was 2 years ago, in England, in January. I, 22 female, had a severe workplace accident and was rushed to the hospital and had a concussion and some nerve damage in my back. A few days later I could go home, and my mom, 50, picked me up. She picked me up around 9 p.m., and our house is around 2 hours away, so it was pretty dark. My mom has always said she felt odd when driving on a specific stretch of road, but I never thought anything of it because I already knew she hated driving at night. She gets the creeps easily. Anyway, we saw a bright red car overtake ours while it was going pretty fast, but nothing was coming towards us. As I mentioned, it was a straight road, so it didn't seem that dangerous under the circumstances. But as it was alongside us, we saw it go through a misty, white truck coming towards it. I gasped and covered my eyes, expecting an impact, but nothing happened. The car just carried on like nothing happened. My first instinct was, okay, calm down, you have a concussion, you're seeing shit, right? I look over, and my mom, no pun intended, looks like she's seen a ghost. Even though the car was pretty dim, I could see her knuckles tight on the wheel and her eyes wide. I'm almost certain if the road wasn't straight, we would have crashed because I've never seen her that shocked before. I asked, did you see what I saw? And without hesitation she said, that car just went through a truck. We both were pretty quiet on the way home, although I noticed she put on the radio, probably to distract her, and she all but jogged into the house from the driveway. All things considered, I still can't explain what we saw. My mom refuses to use that road whenever possible. We've talked about it since but really can't wrap our heads around it. This is a story set in rural India during the early 2000s. Back when I was a kid, our village was not as developed in terms of infrastructure. One thing you need to know about people from the rural south is that they're extremely religious and have ceremonies for all sorts of things. This is important for context. On one of these festival weeks we decided to visit the old temples for prayers. The road there wound round a hill and went pretty deep into the forest. This, coupled with it being monsoon season, meant we took an easy 3 hours to get there. One thing about monsoons in India is that, Bizarrely, some villages get more rain than the others. This phenomenon persists even when the villages are only a few kilometers apart. So we went from a lightly cloudy village to something straight out of twilight. We could barely see the road ahead of us. The driver somehow took a wrong turn, I still don't know how. Most hilly roads are one way, and we ended up even deeper in the forest. Keep in mind it's so dark we thought it was evening, despite it being early afternoon. We found a few houses there, and the driver decided to ask around for directions. No dice, all of them were abandoned. But weirdly, they seemed well kept. Okay, maybe the residents have gone to some festival ceremony. But how could they be well kept from this deep in the forest? Plus, this was before Google Maps, so our GPS didn't have a stable network. The driver decides to try his luck through this settlement. My parents are getting increasingly worried, as timing is important in rituals. I am sitting in the back, feeling starved because the pre-ritual breakfasts are terrible. The road gets increasingly shabby, but the driver pushes through. I noticed that the trees appeared to be decaying slowly. Like they were dark brown and the leaves were drooping low. I also noticed a distinct lack of birds. I was from the city, so country birds were special to me. Then we just hear a noise. Like a whistling singing combo. Keep in mind this is a hilly forest, so maybe it's the wind, maybe it's the forest itself. It's been years, but I remember that sound. My parents are now scared that there's a large animal stalking us. Unlike Americans, we couldn't carry arms. My dad urges the driver to turn back, but he says he knows the road from here, a blatant lie, and he could drive us out. Besides, going back meant losing fuel. The sound gets softer and louder and at times seems like it's coming from the car itself. And then we see weird shit. I don't remember it exactly since I was a kid, but it seemed like things were dangling from the trees overhead. Dilapidated things. It's dark, so I was told it's monkeys, but we had absolutely no idea at that point. I remember my head hurting severely. The driver eventually found his way out but looked worried. We ditched the temple's idea and drove home. He stopped by a cafe for chai and asked around in our native language. I found out years later that we had driven through a black magic area of the forest. A place where practitioners congregate to perform old rituals, things our culture finds dangerous. Apparently we were the first ones to go through that area. Most locals stayed away. We heard many rumors, but we couldn't understand how an entire road could exist in that area. The locals said the usual, the forest is alive, give it respect, but how could the forest magically conjure a road through it? Plus, if there was a road, wouldn't the government have gone through the area and fixed it up? Additionally, I was informed that the sound was caused by spirits attempting to entice us to either leave the road or stop moving altogether. Our family, who previously resided there, has relocated, and as a result, we no longer visit that village. However, I recall it being the subject of a well-known local legend, which my parents were unaware of, as they were from the city. I think they expanded the roads there later. Furthermore, if anyone nitpicks, in India we consider such villages to be hometowns more than cities since our ancestors/older relatives had built strong communities there. I think I almost hit a skinwalker. For context, I live in the Midwest, in a suburban area. My boyfriend also lives in a suburban area, about 30 to 60 minutes away from me, depending on whether I use the interstate, highway, or city roads. I usually take the interstate there and the highway back since it's only a mile from his neighborhood to the interstate. There is also another road I can take, a paved country road with one lane on each side and no streetlights. It eventually meets with a few main streets, which are numbered roads we use where I live, and it will take you back towards the highway and city. I apologize for all the background about the roads, but I feel that it's important, and I feel like my choice was a definite sign that the butterfly effect is always at work. On to the story. Earlier today, I went to pick up my boyfriend, and we basically hung out and binge-watched a TV show I recently got him into, Broadchurch. Around 11 p.m., he says he should probably go home since he works that morning. I agree and drive him home using the interstate with no problems. We kiss goodbye, and then I am on my way out of the neighborhood and towards the street that takes me to the main roads. If I turn right, it's a straight shot to the highway. If I turn left, I can take it down to the country road for a bit of a late-night drive. I decided to take the latter. I turn left, then turn right at the stoplight and begin to drive through the dark country night. It was nice out, so I had my windows rolled down and my music up, just letting the breeze come in. It was pretty windy, so my car was swerving a little from the wind, and you couldn't see the stars or anything because the clouds were taking over the sky, building up a storm. I thought about switching on my high beams to see better, but the road was really curvy and had many hills, and I was afraid I'd accidentally blind someone coming from the opposite direction. What happened next made me glad I didn't turn them on. On the left was a small patch of woods and overgrowth, to my right were wide open, empty fields, and in front of me was a hill. Toward the crest of a hill, I saw something beginning to cross the road. Something large and dark, with what looked like antlers on its head. I thought maybe at first it was a deer or even an elk, and I slowed down, but when I got closer, I realized something was wrong. One of the things that was wrong was that it was moving very slowly, like it was hurt or something, and it didn't even glance at me, it just kept moving towards the patch of trees to my left, which I thought seemed weird. I felt like it should have at least acknowledged the sound of my vehicle. The second thing was that this animal that I presumed was a deer or elk, couldn't have been. It was at least the size of a moose, but that couldn't be right because where I'm from there are no moose. We had deer, and maybe some elk, but not moose. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I watched this moose thing make its way across the road, and then it stopped, and it looked right at me. It twisted its head so fast to look at me I almost screamed. Its face was hideous, it looked rotten somehow, like it was withering away, and its eyes were so dark, I was so scared it didn't have any eyes. There was blood dripping from where its mouth was, and I could see sharp teeth poking out from its lips as they pulled back into a sneer. I thought about reversing my car and hightailing it out of there, but I was frozen. You know how when adrenaline kicks, they say you enter either fight or flight mode? Well, they don't tell you that there's a third option, and that's to freeze, which is exactly what I did. I just stayed in place, hands still on the wheel, feet still digging into the brakes. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the creature that was staring back at me, but when it started moving towards my car, I honestly thought I was going to die. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, and could barely even breathe. All I could do was hope and pray that I wouldn't be killed by some freakish, moose-looking monster. And then a pair of lights began to rise over the hill toward us, and as the other vehicle's high beams shone on the thing in the road, it let out this blood-curdling scream that didn't sound entirely human. It was guttural and animalistic and sort of raspy? It's hard to explain. But I watched as that thing got on its hind legs and lurched itself across the road and into the thicket of trees and bushes, narrowly missing the other person. I knew that thing would probably come back out if I stayed where I was, so before I could give it a chance, I slammed on my gas pedal and gunned it out of there, going well over the posted speed limit. I just wanted to get as far away from it as possible. Every dark curve or patch of trees or field made me so paranoid that I would see the creature again, and all I wanted to do was go home and never for the life of me drive on that godforsaken country road again. I made it home safe but shaken, and to cut a long story short, my family thought I was being hysterical and had just seen a deer. But I know what I saw, and that thing wasn't a deer. It couldn't have been. I've read up on skinwalkers, but I'm not sure if that's what I saw. I mean, do they even exist out in the Midwest? I thought it was more in the Arizona/New Mexico area. Why would a skinwalker be here? Why would it come after me? Was it even a skinwalker, or was it something else entirely? Was it my mind just playing tricks on me? What was that thing? Please, if anyone knows or has any idea what it was, please tell me. I'm so scared I'm going to come across that thing again, and I don't know if next time I'll be as lucky. Followed by 3 glowing lights on the highway. In 2016, my boyfriend and I were traveling back to our city from our friend's house, located an hour away. They were hosting a housewarming, there was really bad energy in that house, that's for another story, and they were having a bonfire, so we ended up staying pretty late. We started our hour-long drive home along the highway between our 2 towns. It was a weekday and late, so we were the only vehicle on the road as far as you could see either way. Anyway, we are traveling along this rural highway, part of the Highway of Tears. I felt it could be of note to mention sad vibes, with nothing around but farmland and bush, alone. I waited until I noticed 3 glowing orange lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another car, but why would it have 3 headlights, I thought. So naturally, I figured it could be motorcycles, not uncommon to see around here. They seemed off, though, then I realized they weren't really following the curves of the road, and they were zipping around sporadically. I eventually mentioned this to my boyfriend. He had also noticed them in his side mirror. I felt pretty uneasy. Then, the 3 lights appear somewhat herb-like and glowing, and they are suddenly getting closer and closer behind our truck at an impossible rate of speed for any vehicle. Again, these lights, or orbs, moved directly towards us, even though a vehicle would have followed the curves of the highway. These lights would zip up close behind the truck. Never too close, but close enough. Then zip backward away from us. They would rise up fast into the sky and drop back down. I was freaking the heck out of myself. My boyfriend was trying to keep me calm, but I was shaking, and I could tell he was unnerved AF too. And he is not someone to worry about things like glowing lights and orbs or anything paranormal at all. What we were seeing was not making any sense, though. It wasn't anything to do with light reflections or anything. There were basically no lights aside from our dashboard and headlights. Not with how vivid and solid they were or how fast and erratic they were. This continued for pretty much the entire drive. I'm white-knuckling it the entire way. I'm freaking myself out, thinking stuff like, what if we broke down right now? What are these things? Why are they following us? It wasn't until we finally got close enough to civilization again that they backed off and disappeared. We were so relieved that we stopped at the toast stand in the small community outside our city, and my body ached from being tense for so long. I think about those lights often. What on earth were they? Spirits? UFOs? Something else? And why were they following us? Testing us? Could they be teasing us? I wish I knew. Anyway, I hope you liked my experience. If you have any thoughts on what these lights were, I'm open to hearing. Thanks. Saw some real horror movie shit while driving. So I was on the way to a girl's house who lives in the middle of nowhere late at night. When I was only about 3 to 4 minutes away, I came around a curve, and there was a large, out-of-shape adult male running out of a driveway into the road, waving his arms in my headlights. That's not the crazy part though. He had on rain boots, blue jeans, and a white apron with what looked like blood all over it. In one hand he had a knife and nothing in the other. He was obviously trying to stop me and looked crazy as hell. Obviously I didn't even think of stopping. I swerved and had to get in the grass on the side of the road to dodge him. I got to the girl's house and explained what had happened and tried to get her to go ride back just to see if he was still there, but she was terrified and told me that the people who live in that area are some pretty rough characters. She doesn't live in a great area to start with, so she's been trained to just say not my problem and go about her day. I wonder what would have happened if I had stopped? Strange experience in the car. This is my first time ever sharing something like this. But just tonight, probably not even an hour ago, I had a strange experience, and one of my best friends told me to share it somewhere to see if anyone else has any answers or similar experiences. So here we go. Basically, I was driving myself and my passenger home from a game of D&D. I've driven this same route countless times at all hours of the day. I will admit it is night, and I do not have the best vision, but what I saw was so clear. Anyway, it's night, and I'm driving home. I think I see a car coming up on the left of me, so I glance at my mirror to see where they are as we're about to pass over a super narrow bridge, but I don't see a car. What I do see, though, is what seems to be the face of a man. It has, like, an outline of a black hoodie on, and its face is so pale, white as a sheet. But I couldn't really make out eyes or a mouth, though there were these dark spots that were a bit blurry in the places where those features would be. And it was so close to the mirror, I didn't even mistake it for someone in the middle of the road behind me. I swerve out of panic because, obviously, I was expecting a car, not a face. I blink, straighten out, and look at the mirror again, and all I see is road. No face. My passenger and I were just fine, no harm done. And I promise I was awake and clear-headed. I didn't mention it to my passenger, but as soon as I got home, I texted my close friend, and she said she's heard the same thing from other people before, and we kind of came to the suggestion to share somewhere to see if anyone had any answers or what have you. So that was my experience tonight. Definitely a little freaked. But I'd love to know if anyone has any thoughts on this because I'm just freaked. Creepy experience when I was younger. I must have been around 9 or 10 at the time and lived in a small village in the English countryside. It was just a normal Wednesday. I had gotten back from school, played around for a bit, and ate dinner. It was then time for me to head down to my taekwondo lesson that I used to go to. It was just a basic club that was located in the next town, around a 15-minute drive. My dad got ready to take me, and I got in the car. We were driving down the normal road that took us to the bypass to the town where I took my lessons. I would take the same route every Wednesday evening. However, something strange and unexplainable happened this night as I was on my way. It got dark around 5 or 6 p.m., the time I was traveling. The road was in between two relatively large dikes and surrounded by fields, which is fairly common in English countrysides. As I was driving down the road, this lady jumped out, waving her hand as she was trying to gain someone's attention that happened to be me and my dad. My dad and I were fairly taken aback by the situation and were pretty surprised. My dad slowed down and began to reverse the car back to where the lady was standing. My dad asked her what she was doing and if she was okay, to which she replied, "I crashed my car down the dike." My dad, concerned, asked if he could help, to which she replied, "Can you take me to my dad's house? which is located back towards the village. When we were stopped by the dike, I could see no visible car or any sort of sign that a car had gone down the dike. The dike was large, not like a small one that you quite often see. There would have been water in the dike, and the lady was visibly wet. She got into the back seat of the car, and my dad drove her to her dad's house, which was located about 5 minutes from where we were heading back toward the village. My dad and the lady carried out some small talk where she apologized for making me late for my taekwondo lesson. We dropped the lady off, and she walked towards a house that she claimed was her dad's. It seemed to me that she suddenly disappeared behind a metal gate, likely due to the darkness, which I found quite strange at the time. We then proceeded to take me to my lesson. During the drive, my dad commented on how strange the whole situation was, and we checked the seat behind where she had been sitting. What struck us as odd was that there was no wet patch or any evidence to suggest someone dripping wet had occupied that seat. However, I distinctly remember seeing her visibly wet. The next day my dad went back to the dike, where he saw no sign of a car and no sign of a car that had lost control down the side of a dike. If anyone has anything to say on this, please let me know. It would be great to hear your opinions on this strange encounter I had when I was younger. Am I overreacting, or was this maybe something a bit more sinister? When I was 17, I got my provisional license and started to learn to drive like most people my age. I was taking driving lessons, but in addition to that, I often went out driving with my dad. My dad works quite late, so this meant it was usually dark by the time we'd go out. One night we were out for a drive as normal. It was a cold, wet winter night in January, and there weren't many cars on the road. My dad suggested that we go to the village where he grew up, as it is on a hill and there are lots of steep roads I can practice hill starts on. After driving about the village for an hour or so, we decided to go home. When you exit this village, there are 2 roads, one goes back home, and the other is a country road. I ask my dad, where does that road go? He tells me it's an old country road, but it also takes us back home. We decided to take that road out of curiosity. My dad claimed to know the road from his childhood. However, it was pitch black. With the car's full beam on, you can barely see ahead, and you can't see beside or behind. There is no light or any other form of civilization for miles. As I'm driving along this road, I see owls, foxes, and deer, usual Scottish wildlife. I've been driving along this road for what felt like hours at this point, and I had this feeling I wasn't anywhere near home. I finally decided to stop and turn back, but this road was a single lane with ditches at each side, so I had to find a spot wide enough to turn around. I keep driving on. The time is around 11:30ish at this point, and I'm starting to feel very tired. We come down a steep windy road and turn around a sharp corner to find a wider bit of road where I could turn. Behind this, about 20 yards from the road, was an old cottage. It looked as if it had been abandoned for years. It had no windows or door and was covered in bushes and ivy. This creeped me out, but I was more interested in turning round and getting home. As I'm turning around, the headlights shine into the windows of the cottage. I see what looks like a tall dark figure inside. In the brief few seconds the lights were on in the house. I pass it off as my mind playing tricks on me, as I was already creeped out at this point. I turn the car around and face back the way I came when I stalled the car. This wasn't unusual for me, as I'd been learning to drive for a few months at this point and often stalled the car when I was going slow. I try to restart the engine, but the key doesn't seem to fit into the lock. I keep trying, and it's still not going in. My dad is trying to help me, and it finally works. I turn the key. The headlights flash on, and I see the same figure standing in the middle of the road. It seemed to be a man wearing a gas mask and a long raincoat. The raincoat was covered in mud and moss. He stood and stared at me. I was in such shock I couldn't react. I didn't know what to do, so I honked the horn, and the figure darted off into the trees on the left side of the road. "What are you honking for?" my dad says. I floor the gas. "Did you not see what I said?" "See what he says." We both go silent, and I drive as fast as I possibly can away from the cottage. We finally get off this country road and are back in civilization. I am driving along the road to the village I live in, and I see this BMW coming towards me. The car appears to be coming into my side of the road, so I slow down. There is a car parked for the woodland trails on the left, so I assume they're going in there but just not indicating. However, this car does not go into the car park. It keeps heading towards me on my side of the road. I've slowed down to pretty much a halt at this point, and at the last minute the car swerves back onto their side of the road. I look in my rearview mirror when I see a gas mask. The figure was in the back seat. I look back at the mirror, and it's gone. My dad asks me why I slowed down. I couldn't explain what just happened. All I know is there was no car. I finally get home safe and sound. I have been driving for a few years now, but I often think of this drive and wonder what it was I saw at that cottage. I drove for Lyft for 3 months in San Francisco before my next job started up. The stuff I saw I could write a book on, but the most notable creepy one? Easy. I usually finished my shifts around 3 a.m., after most of the drunk passengers had reached their final destinations for the night. I decided to take one more fare. I just dropped 3 people off at a rave on a pier. It was probably 3-ish a.m. I got the call, and it wasn't far. It was a low-number pier, far from the tourist traps. Like a far pier. Dimly lit. I figured it was a kid that wandered too far from the rave. I pulled up to the pickup spot, and no one was there. It was hella creepy and empty. Little bit of fog. Walking from the abandoned-looking pier was a person who was definitely not my rider, slowly approaching me with too many jackets on and an ice chest. I kept looking around, hoping that the person wasn't my rider. They got closer, and the orange lights from the pier above were spaced apart so they'd walk from light to dark to light to dark. They finally got close enough that I could see. There was ducking blood on the ice chest. My first thought was, there's a head in the chest. No fishing poles. Nothing noticeable would explain a bloody ice chest. I threw my shit in drive and shut off the app and called non-emergency and let them know WTF I just saw. That was my last night driving past 2:30 a.m. Country road. This story isn't mine, but one that was told to me by my nanny, more like a grandma figure to me, when I was younger. This story has stuck with me vividly all these years. I'll call my nanny Sarah. Sarah was a teenager in the 60s, and she was with her mom visiting family out in the country. They were staying at a house with Sarah's uncle, aunt, and 2 cousins. One summer night, Sarah and her cousins, both girls, also teenagers, were out late drinking beer. They started their drive home around 1 a.m. They were about 30 minutes away from the house, going straight along a rural road that went on for miles. It was pitch black, with no streetlights, and they were about 10 minutes away from the house when they noticed a truck was behind them. At first they thought nothing of it, but the truck continued to get closer and closer until it was right on their tail. Sarah and her cousins began freaking out and driving faster, but so did the truck. Then, it turned on its brights. Sarah told me they just kept driving faster and faster, but the truck kept following them. It was so bright, they could barely see. Finally they got to the house and turned onto the dirt road it was on, a bad decision they were about to realize. The dirt road only had one access point to the road they were coming from. As soon as Sarah and her cousins pulled toward the house, the truck pulled into the driveway and swerved sideways, blocking the only exit. 3 men slowly got out of the car, holding large objects that Sarah couldn't quite make out. At this point, it was nearly 1:30 a.m. when Sarah heard her mother screaming from the house, "Sarah, run!" Sarah and her cousins bolted into the house, slamming the door shut and locking it behind them. Only moments later, the doorknob began rattling, and the men began banging on the door. The men began walking around the house, trying to get into every window they could find. After about 30 harrowing minutes, they seemingly gave up. I guess they didn't have a phone at the time, so they had no way to call for help. The biggest question Sarah had was why her mom was awake in the middle of the night and how she was outside at just the right time. She had no way of knowing that Sarah was in trouble. Sarah's mom said she had a dream that something bad was going to happen to Sarah, and she woke up in a sweat with a terrible feeling. She went outside to see if their car was back, to see if they made it home safe, and that's when they pulled into the driveway. Something really strange has been happening lately, and I know I'm not crazy, because friends of mine have experienced this with me on 2 separate occasions. I swear I'm teleporting across town somehow. This has happened to me 3 times, and it's seriously starting to freak me out. It happened for the 3rd time less than an hour before I started writing these words. I was riding in my friend's car back to my place from a movie theater on the opposite side of town, a trip that would normally take around 15 minutes. It took us only 5 minutes, and I noticed what had happened almost immediately. However, I didn't want to mention it until my friend, whom we'll call E, did so out of fear of sounding crazy. On the drive, we randomly ended up downtown, close to my place, much sooner than we should have. The transition is so seamless that I can't tell the difference until I see man-made landmarks like buildings. E mentioned that he didn't make any turns that he'd normally have to make to get there, we just ended up there. We weren't distracted by a conversation or anything, and the both of us were stone cold sober. Then E started to freak out a little bit. I told him about the other 2 experiences I had had, which I will discuss later. We made it to my place and decompressed for a bit before he left. In the car, I told E about the other 2 events like that I had experienced. The very first time I had something like that happen, I was walking to a gas station to grab a snack after work and somehow ended up walking on a street a mile down the road. No time had passed at all, and I know this because I check my watch fairly often. The second experience was the most drastic of all three I've had. I was in the car with another friend of mine, we'll call him Jay, and we were on our way to a Walmart a 30-minute drive away from his place one morning. We ended up getting there in 10 minutes. He did notice what had happened shortly after starting the drive over, though. We took a turn into this more scenic road in my state, Virginia, which would be a straight path to North Carolina. Instead of us going towards North Carolina, we ended up on a very similar road much closer to that Walmart within a matter of seconds. The transition was nearly unnoticeable until I saw buildings I recognized from the part of town the Walmart is in. That experience freaked me out, too. I have no clue what's going on, and to be honest, I'm really scared. I don't know what's happening, and I want to find out. Has anyone else experienced this? Another thing that happens, and this phenomenon has been consistent all three times, is that I, along with E and J, get their horrible burning sensation in our lower chests, and we feel this awful sense of uneasiness. Standing up after an experience like this feels like a burden, and walking around is awkward and clumsy. All three times I've had this happen, I, along with E and J, have been completely sober. Please help, I just want to know what the hell is happening. Weird experience inside the Grand Canyon. We were searching for a free place to park and sleep, so we just randomly drove to a camping area that was deep inside the Grand Canyon. Things started to get weird as we were approaching the camping site. We passed what looked like an abandoned town where there was this entrance with a dirt road that would drive into the canyon. All the houses were boarded up and abandoned. There was only one station on the radio, and it had a weird, very outdated, and possibly racist song playing, like from the 1920s. It was late, and there was no moon, so we drove for around 30 minutes in pitch darkness down the canyon until we reached the camping site. The camping site opened up at the bottom, revealing about 5 wooden tents scattered around the area. Sparse around the area in a circular fashion, we drove around in a circle illuminating everything to notice our surroundings and then parked in the middle and made a campfire. As we were hanging out by the campfire, my wife noticed a reflection in one of the wooden tents. It seemed like a piece of metal was hanging, and it was glaring back the red backlights of the car. As I noticed it, I had the urge to point it with my flashlight, and when I did, it appeared that there was another reflection under it reflecting the light of my flashlight. So I became confused and started to move my flashlight in a pattern like I was waving and noticed the reflection waving back. But the reflection was like 250 milliseconds slower, so I did it many times, confirming that there was some strange lag in the reflection that put me really uneasy because I couldn't understand why there would be a lag. As I'm perplexed by what's happening, we noticed actual flashlights from where there was a reflection, so we felt relieved that someone was there, so we just turned around and awaited what we assumed was a park ranger. We could see a couple of flashlights bouncing about 150 feet away, as if people were walking toward us. However, after about a minute, we realized that the flashlights continued to bounce around without anyone actually approaching. It seemed as if they were merely pretending to come closer. Furthermore, to add, there was a dead silence, so this made it even more strange. At that point, we immediately panicked at all the strange things that were happening, so we just ran inside the car and drove away. I think I saw a ghost last night while driving home. I was driving home on a dual carriageway about midnight last night. I was going about 50 miles per hour. I saw what looked like a shadow figure standing on the central median. I figured it must be a trick of the light, but it didn't move or disappear as I approached and passed it. Maybe it was a person trying to cross the road, but I really don't think it was, as there was something off about it. I am very much a skeptic, but the sighting was really bizarre. I've tried to find out if there's ever been other reports of anything unusual on that stretch of road but couldn't find anything. Weird. I think I teleported and maybe time traveled. I'm confused. Okay, so this is going to sound super crazy, but I'm honestly kind of freaking out, so I have to vent somewhere, and I would like to know what other people think might be happening, so I'm hiding here in my attic at midnight typing this shit out. I live in a small town that is about 25 minutes away from cities to the north, west, and south, with a mountain located to the east. However, I am unsure where to begin or how to describe the strange occurrences we have been experiencing. Since COVID, my roommates and I have taken to driving through the woods surrounding our town, as there isn't much to do here. We still try to avoid people as much as possible by wearing face masks, so we prefer exploring roads and observing wildlife instead. We know these roads very well and drive them frequently. However, several times while driving at night through a specific area, we have experienced strange occurrences that we cannot explain. As of tonight, We have decided to begin deciphering these incidents in search of an explanation, but nothing makes sense. The first large incident occurred about a week ago. We were driving our usual route, we were driving through the woods, and suddenly on the side of the road there was this huge creature, about the size of an elk. It was fur that looked bearish, but it moved almost like a car and was skinny and long and scared the shit out of us. We sped down the road to increase the distance between us and the creature, even though it seemed to largely ignore our car. The speed limit on this particular road is 25 miles per hour. At that point, we were quite scared, so we decided to head home. We had to be back home at about 10 o'clock to go to sleep for work in the morning, and it was only 7:03, but we were running low on gas, and we were closer to one of the larger cities than to our town, so we decided to head toward there because from where we were, it should be about maybe a 10-minute drive. We drove for about 3 minutes when we all felt something was wrong, but we didn't know what. We went to the gas station, arriving at what should have been 7:20, but it was 9:47 when we checked our phones. No one could explain the time, and we needed to be home, but I don't like to speed at night, so we decided to just be late. We contacted our other roommate to inform them that we were running late, and they criticized us for being away for so long, but that is beside the point. So we headed back toward our town, which was expected to take about 25 minutes. About 25 minutes, like I had said before, and that's about what the drive felt like. About 15 minutes into the drive back on the side of the road again, there is this giant creature, this time standing up on its hind legs, at least 10 feet tall, and I just ducking swerve around it and then speed like hell towards home. This is now on a separate road. After we pulled up to our house and entered, our roommate freaked out and asked if we had gotten gas in town. We replied, no, we got it in the city, as we mentioned before. He stared at us strangely, and when we looked at the clock, it showed 9:53. And we were inside our house. It made no sense. First we lost 2 hours, and now we make a 25-minute drive in 5 minutes with my slowest driving. In my shitty car that can't go over 50. We couldn't explain it. We went over everything from a time anomaly to alien abduction to witchcraft. We just are at a complete loss. So we avoided going on drives for a bit because we were just worried about what the absolute hell was going on, but we eventually broke down and went into the woods again. Tonight. And I honestly am terrified to my wits' end. I can't sleep. There was nothing unusual about our drive. We were passing familiar fences just 2 minutes from our town when I suddenly developed a horrible headache. My roommate, who had been talking, abruptly stopped, everything became fuzzy, and we both closed our eyes, only to realize that the road ahead was wrong. I had no idea where I was. I swerved in a panic but regained myself and kept driving. We were both dumbfounded. She asked me where we were, and I had no answer. Then after about 30 seconds a familiar street sign came by. We were suddenly entering a city we had just been nowhere near. We had traveled over 50 miles in the blink of an eye. I literally cried. I have no idea how it happened. We immediately turned on the road home, and I refused to blink most of the way, and when I did, I made sure she was keeping her eyes open and on the road. We got home, and I literally hid in the attic. And here I am, sharing this. Please, someone believe me and explain this. I'm terrified. It followed me home. I had an experience with a skinwalker, and I'd thought about sharing it with you all. I worked late last Friday night and stayed until after 1:30 a.m. It was odd. The plant usually has a dozen people during the day, but only 3 of us were there that night. I was out in the plant, making repairs, when I noticed something just outside the fence. I couldn't make out a distinct shape, but it was dark, and it moved quickly. I wasn't able to listen out for it because it was loud in the plant. I figured that it might have been a dog, coyote, bobcat, or even a cougar. Stray animals are no strangers to the plant. Just the other day I saw 2 dogs and a cat traveling together in the plant. That was strange. I continued to work, and when I went back to the truck to get tools, I saw whatever it was outside the fence dart across the roadway and into the process pipeline area. It was dark and moved on all 4s, a blurry, dark mass that moved quickly. It was about 3 feet tall while it moved on all 4 legs. My best description is that it looked like a cougar. Its movement was fluid, much like how a cat stalks its prey. I felt quite uneasy when I saw the creature move into the plant, so I radioed operations to report something inside the plant. They teased me about it, and they sent out an auxiliary operator to investigate what went into the plant. The auxiliary operator walked around the plant with his flashlight and a 2-way radio. The lights in the plant had an orange tint and very poor illumination, which made it seem like the orange light only made more shadows than light. I picked up the pace and hurried my repairs, just to get back to the office and away from whatever was out there. It was about 2:15 a.m., and I was wrapping up my repairs and headed back to the office. I went inside and met with the operators, and they felt confident that the plant was going to stay running. They also asked about what I saw, and I told them what I saw. They joked and teased again. It wasn't my first rodeo. I've seen a skinwalker before, and what I noticed that night wasn't close to what I've seen in the past, so I really didn't pay much attention to what was out there. I think what worried me the most was that it could have been a cougar. They've been seen in the area recently, and I didn't want to be its next meal. I gathered my personal stuff and went back to the truck, fiddled with my phone, and started the ignition. The truck's lights automatically came on, and I saw something tall, and it was black. It stood about 7 feet tall, and it dropped on all fours and ran back into the plant. When it ran off, it looked like a cougar. Its movements were fluid and effortless. When it stood upright, it looked like a tall, thin person just standing close to one of the process pipeline towers. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to, so I took off without telling the operators. I figured that I'd give them a call when I was already on the road, leaving the plant. Just before leaving the plant, there was one required stop, the guard shack. We were required to stop and sign in/out of the plant. I didn't want to stop. I thought that whatever was out there might catch up to me and do who knows what to me. I had to stop anyway. There was an automatic gate, and it was closed. I got out and signed that stupid logbook and ran back into the safety of my truck. I had a feeling that it might have gotten into the truck bed, so I turned on the rear bed lights. I had a huge sense of relief when I didn't see anything there. I left the plant and headed home, which took me through the Navajo reservation on a lonely stretch of dirt roads. My senses were on full alert. I was expecting that whatever was stalking me might be following me. I just had that feeling. I finally made it home, but the strange thing was that I don't remember seeing any cars along the roads, and even in my neighborhood, it was eerily quiet. Usually I would have seen a few cars driving around town, but this time it was different. When I arrived at my driveway, I opened the door, and I walked around the truck, again looking for whatever was out there. That's when I smelled it. It was a very disgusting, pungent smell. It smelled like rotten flesh and a wet dog. The smell was everywhere. I covered my nose and looked around. I didn't look too hard because I wanted to hurry up and get into my house. Once inside, I went over to my gun safe and grabbed my .357 mag and a flashlight. I went back outside and walked toward my truck and shined the light around the neighborhood, and I didn't see anything. I was thinking that if the skinwalker followed me, the neighborhood dogs would be barking. It was still quiet, and I shined the light on my roof and my next door neighbor's roof. That's when I saw it again. It was hiding behind the rooftop air conditioner. It ducked away when I shined the light at it. I was surprised and scared at the same time. I took off for the front door and locked it behind me. I turned on the security system and pulled up the cameras to see where it was at. My cameras didn't capture it, but I did hear the bone whistle. For those of you that don't know about the bone whistle, they are made from human finger bones, hollowed out and used to make whistles. After the whistle, the neighborhood dogs started barking. I didn't hear it anymore. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that morning. Once it was daylight, I walked around the house, looking for clues as to what was walking around the neighborhood. I didn't find any tracks or anything out of the ordinary. I even looked for any disturbances in the ground, since skinwalkers will sometimes bury witching bundles at their victims' homes. It's now been almost a week, and I haven't noticed anything unusual, and I'm unsettled that it knows where I live. I guess time will tell us what happens next. Hermanas Road, Deming, New Mexico. So after recently visiting my family in New Mexico, I wanted to share this story. What reminded me of these events was actually a country drive I took with my brother. It was near sundown, so we decided to just take a drive out to listen to some music and enjoy some scenery. I live in the city, CA. Heading back from our drive, my brother took a back road that would lead us to a main road back to our house. When he got on it, I immediately got shivers and remembered this road. We were on Hermanas Road, a really sketchy dirt road that loved to bust tires, shake your vehicle uncontrollably while driving, and was the length of about 2 football fields. But most of all, this road was ducking creepy at night. Luckily, there was just enough light left when we crossed it and headed back onto the paved road to our house. So when I was a senior in high school, I started dating this girl who lived out in the country with her family. Once you crossed Hermanas and hit the stop sign, you take a right, and there were a few trailers and houses that resided around the area. On the road itself, there were only a few houses, some were ranches. So I would drive her home from my place at night, and at first I never saw anything. But make no mistake. At night, the road was on its own. The road would be dark, I mean pitch black there. The road had trenches on the side, I guess to keep rain from flooding it. But if you weren't paying attention out there in the dark, you could fall over. You really had to be careful when crossing the road due to all the obstacles present. But from the beginning of my senior year until graduation, I drove that road at night while taking my girl home and never saw anything unusual. Then, about a month after graduation, I was driving my girlfriend home during the day when we noticed a large cloud of dirt in the mesquite bushes beside her mother's house. As we got closer, we realized it was a car that had flipped into the brush. We got out and went to the scene. A guy about my age at the time was sitting near his flipped car and bleeding from his hand. We asked him if he was okay and immediately called an ambulance. He really wasn't hurt too bad besides cracking his knuckles open when the car flipped. But he was definitely in shock. We gave him a towel and asked him what had happened. All that he would really say is that somehow he lost control of his car. When EMS got there, we headed out. Not too long after that, maybe a few weeks, I had 3 experiences driving home from my girlfriend's house that prevented me from ever driving down that road again. This occurred when I was 19 years old. I am currently 33, so I cannot recall the precise details of how it transpired, but I do remember that it took place within a span of 2 months. One night while I was driving to my girlfriend's house, I came across a dead dog lying near the road. I remember it was a big pit bull. From my headlights, it looked brown, but it lay there sprawled out like someone had moved its limbs to make the figure more dramatic. Well, it sure as shit worked on me. The look of it was unnerving. I told my girl about it when I got there, and we thought maybe a neighbor's dog had gotten hit and someone tried to move it. When I left and drove by the spot I had seen the dog, it was gone. 2. One night I decided to stay the night at my girl's house. It was late, maybe around 1. I'm driving down the road when all of a sudden I see someone on the side of the road frantically waving their arms trying to make me stop. I remember being really startled, so as I got closer to where the person was waving, I started to pull over to see what was happening. When I saw the figure drop its arms and look at me strangely, it then moved back and disappeared. To this day, the best way I can describe it is like the scene in 1408 when John Cusack is waving to that shadow figure across the building next to him. 3. On what would be my final time on this road until now, it was one night while coming home from girls. I had just turned onto the road when my 2000 Nissan Frontier started to shake uncontrollably. I thought, okay, maybe the dirt waves on the road are bad on this side, so stay on the other until it's over, and the same thing happened. Shaking the shit out of my truck, I'm driving at normal speed, going over the bumps, when all of a sudden my truck starts to want to lose control. I remember vividly my truck was getting pushed near the side of the road. I was holding onto the steering wheel trying to straighten it out and hitting the brake because for some reason the truck had accelerated. The truck finally came to a stop as my front end hit a few mesquite bushes. I was shook up after that. It was such a weird experience because it really felt like someone grabbed my truck and was trying to push it off the road, and I was resisting it. I backed up and hauled some major ass out of there. I was so scared I threw caution to the wind in my escape. After that night, I never ventured back onto the road. I told my girlfriend and some of my family what happened. I always assumed no one would believe it, so I never pressed too hard on it. Additionally, I didn't want them to insist on me taking them there. Until she came and moved with me in town, I took another way to my girlfriend's house. From now on, I'd come from the opposite side of where the houses were, from a paved main country road. The creepiest thing about this day is that the first encounter I had on the road was with that kid who flipped his car. I remember him saying, "I don't know how I lost control of the car." And my last encounter on that road was some kind of entity trying to throw me off the damn road, so I wonder if maybe he got thrown off the road? I know his was during the day, but still, it wasn't very far from where my truck finally stopped. I had put the experience in the back of my mind for years, but when my brother took that dirt road to get us home, you best believe all the dread came back. In 2019, a musician buddy and I traveled to watch an old friend perform in Clovis. My friend lives in Roswell, so I picked him up, and we drove the long, mostly barren stretch out east. The show was phenomenal. Still one of the best live shows I've been to. The music ended around 10 p.m., but we hung around late, enjoying laughs and catching up with our friend and his family. We bid adieu and drove into Portales, where we sat in a booth for a late-night Chinese buffet. We were back on the road to Roswell just after 1:30 a.m. Leaving Portales, we were the only car on the road. The headlights of my Honda illuminated the surrounding desert well. I wish I could remember the music. Around 2:20 a.m., roughly 10 miles past Alita, the engine just below 70 miles per hour, we came upon a woman in all white, pirouetting and otherwise twirling and dancing just off the side of the road. I do not know whether she was on point, but it sure as hell looked like it. This woman was so close to the car that her fingers could have brushed it had she reached out ever so slightly. We drove past her in a flash, and my eye snapped to the rear view, where I caught a glimpse of her still dancing, twirling, pirouetting. I kept driving. My friend and I both went white as sheets, and chills ran down our spines. My friend asked, "What was that? We both saw that, right?" I drove on, stunned and mostly silent, but eventually we had a whole convo about it and pondered what we had seen until we went to sleep that night. It felt like an apparition and paranormal to both of us. I went for a drive to clear my head, but something wasn't right. Ever since I got my full license and could drive on my own, I'd head out late at night to clear my head or just unwind. I'd sneak out of my room, careful not to make any noise, grab my coat, boots, phone, and wallet, and then drive off to some back roads. I'd usually be gone for just 1 or 2 hours, enough time to drive somewhere, park, and unwind before heading back. I kept this to myself. During the drive, I'd maybe see 1 or 2 other cars, and I almost never encountered anyone when I got to my destination. These drives usually happened around 2 or 3 a.m., when most people weren't out, and that's exactly what I wanted. Anyways, I'm writing this after getting home from one of those drives, and I'm hoping someone here can help me make sense of it, or at least tell me if I'm going crazy. It was the same as any other night. I got out of bed, threw on some clothes, grabbed my coat, boots, keys, wallet, and phone, just like always, and stepped out into the snowy night. I walked over to my car, unlocked it, started the engine, and waited for it to warm up before heading out. While I waited, I rubbed my hands together, trying to keep warm. I always felt a little vulnerable, just sitting there in the car, waiting for it to heat up. So I kept glancing around, checking to see if my parents had noticed or if anyone was walking around, even though it was late. But like every other night, there was no one around. No one to see me start up the car. And once I pulled out of the driveway, it was the same, still no one around. I drove out of the neighborhood and onto the main road. After a while, I turned off and made my way down the back roads. The pavement became increasingly uneven, and the houses gradually grew farther apart, until the forest almost entirely replaced them. I lived in the countryside, so it didn't take long to get away from society. I was driving down a road I'd been on plenty of times before. As I approached a bend, I noticed what looked like another set of headlights through the trees, nothing unusual. I'd see cars every now and then. But when I rounded the bend, there was no one there. There weren't any turnoffs on the road, so I figured it must have been my headlights reflecting off something in the woods. But as I kept driving, the feeling of unease started to creep in. It felt like I kept seeing more headlights, vanishing in and out of sight, like they were just out of reach. I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, or maybe cars parked off to the side, turning off their headlights before I could spot them. It was pretty dark out, and unless something was right in front of me or had its own light, it was hard to see anything. A few miles later, I parked at my usual spot. I sat there for a minute, trying to shake off the feeling. It was just weird reflections. Nothing to worry about. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to shake off the unease. I've been out here enough times to know that in the silent darkness, your mind can play tricks on you, something about trying to stimulate itself when there's nothing else to focus on. Still, something about tonight felt different. The headlights seemed too real to be just tricks, but they had to be. I couldn't think of any logical reason for what I was seeing. After a few minutes, I decided to get out. The cold air hit me as I opened the door, biting at my skin. The silence was suffocating, and I immediately regretted leaving the warmth of the car. The snow crunched under my boots as I paced around, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. Tonight felt different. I'd never felt this uneasy before. I laughed a little at myself, trying to brush it off. There was nothing around, just trees, snow, and the quiet whisper of the wind. I looked back at the car, my thoughts lingering on the road and those headlights. My eyes automatically scanned the trees around me, expecting to see some movement. But there was nothing. No cars, no lights, just the same endless dark. After taking a few deep breaths of the cool night air, I went back to the car, planning to head home. I got back into the driver's seat and checked all my mirrors. In the rear view, there was a set of unmistakable headlights. They had to be real, there was nothing else. I stared at them, not taking my eyes off the reflection as they grew closer. Eventually, the car passed by me. I glanced over at it as it went by, a blue truck, a middle-aged man wearing a high-vis jacket. As he passed, he briefly looked in my direction, and something about his gaze felt off. I can't quite describe it, but if you've ever seen those Uncanny Valley videos online, you'll know what I mean. He looked human, but there was something about him that made him feel non-human. I couldn't ignore it anymore, the vanishing headlights, the constant unease, and now this guy in the truck. I put my car in drive and started heading home, but it felt like I was being followed. Usually, Seeing more headlights ahead would bring me a sense of relief, but tonight, they only frightened me. Each time I got close enough, they would vanish. I glanced in my mirrors, and there they were again, more lights. With each pair of headlights I saw, my panic grew. Eventually, my dashboard lights turned off, and my headlights dimmed before shutting off completely. My battery had died. I managed to pull over to the side of the road, but there I was, alone in the middle of the woods, with my car dead and my anxiety spiraling out of control. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and my paranoia only grew with the silence surrounding me. I zipped up my coat, put on my gloves and hat, and looked under the hood, using my phone's flashlight to see. But I knew it was hopeless. I knew nothing about cars. The most I could do was fix a flat tire, and recharging a battery was out of my league. I closed the hood and checked for service, and as expected, no bars. I stood outside my car, now hoping to see headlights. I saw a few, but like before, they appeared and then vanished. This happened a few times, and then I noticed it, the silence. It was too quiet. It was always quiet out here, but there was usually something, birds, owls, or something scurrying in the brush. But tonight, nothing. It was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making noise. No wildlife sounds. The leaves swayed, but the forest was eerily still. The silence only broke when I saw headlights again. I could tell these lights were different because they were accompanied by the hum of an engine. I got up and waved my arms, and the truck stopped. A big guy stepped out. I explained my situation, saying I thought my battery had died. He popped the hood, using his phone to illuminate it, and said, "Yeah, it looks that way, bud. I've got some jumper cables in my truck. I can fix you up, and you'll be on your way." I thanked him profusely. Not only had this man stopped to help, but he also didn't seem like a threatening figure, unlike the guy in the other truck. After a bit, he had my battery charged up with the jumper cables, whatever those were, and I didn't really understand the mechanics, but I knew my car was fixed, and I could finally go home. As he finished up, I thanked him again, and he gave me a nod before getting back into his truck. As he started the engine and began to pull away, he glanced over at me one last time. His eyes lingered a little too long, just a bit too steady. Then, as if realizing he was staring, he quickly turned his gaze back to the road. But it wasn't the look itself, it was the way he moved. It felt off. There was something deliberate about it, like he knew more than he was letting on. Before he drove off completely, he called out from the window, "Take care, Aiden. Stay safe out here, alright?" The words were casual, but the use of my name, how did he know my name? I hadn't told him, and I sure hadn't seen him before. It wasn't anything overt, nothing that would make anyone suspect anything too strange at first. But something in the way he said it, like he had no reason to know it but did anyway, it sent a chill down my spine. As his headlights disappeared into the dark, I stood there frozen for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. The silence seemed thicker now, the shadows longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was still being watched. But I drove home, and this time, no headlights appeared. No cars. The night was completely silent, but sometimes, I thought I heard whispers from the forest, like it knew I was noticing things I shouldn't. The stillness. The guy in the truck. The man is calling my name. As I drove, the whispers seemed to grow louder. They were incoherent, but they felt angry. I could barely take it, the weight of the tension pressing down on me. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I approached the highway again, and the familiar sight of houses began to reappear. The entrance to my neighborhood loomed in the distance, a welcome sight. I parked my car, went inside, and came straight to my room. It's 3 a.m. now, and I still haven't been able to sleep. Every time I hear a creak in the house or something outside, I flinch. I don't know if what I saw on those roads was real, or if that man really did have something wrong with his face. Did I tell the other guy my name? What were the whispers? Can someone please help me understand what happened? Is there any explanation for any of this? We have no idea what we saw. This story takes place over the course of a week or so, and I am leaving my friends' names out for anonymity's sake. I was back for the summer from college and was enjoying a regular summer hanging out with friends and doing odd jobs for family members, recutting trails on the property for my mom and stepdad, fixing fences with my dad, and running errands for my yaya, who no longer could drive or get out much due to a recent knee replacement surgery. It was near the end of the summer, and a few of my friends and I had been out late, as none of us really felt like getting home anytime soon, so after dropping off 2 people, the last 3 of us took a slightly longer route home. It was about 3 a.m., and we were still on the freeway with few others. It was a starless night, and my friend's car's exterior lights were all that was lighting up the surrounding area, save the occasional lamppost. I was riding shotgun, and my second friend was in the backseat. We were having a funny debate, as we did when we hung out, and were generally coming to a consensus when I thought I saw something ahead. I saw a light tan shape on the side of the road at the very edge of my friend's car's bubble of light. I'm from California, and deer aren't uncommon, especially by the side of the freeway. Given all this, I assumed it was a deer, albeit a notably lighter colored one than I had ever seen. My friend in the back seat was looking at his phone, and the friend who was driving was focusing on the road, so I figured they'd miss it if I didn't point out the deer to them. The driver and I used to work at a zoo and are nature geeks, so this was a common habit, pointing out animals when we see them. Just as I point at the deer and say, "Hey look, a deer," I was proven wrong. The deer was close now, and I realized it had no hair on its body, and as it stood up slowly, it pivoted to face the road. This exposed the tall, entirely, and I mean entirely, hairless body of a completely naked man. Due to the speed we were driving, I couldn't see any facial features, so all I could make out was the flesh-toned silhouette of a man who appeared to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with long thin arms and legs, slowly rising up from the darkness. The friend who was driving and I immediately freaked the duck out. We each start yelling and screaming shit like, "What the duck was that? And was that a person?" And that sort of shit. In the back seat, our other friend asks us what the duck we're freaking out about, and we tell him. Now, this freaked me out because we were only about 4 miles from where I was staying at the time, and that proximity to who we just saw was enough to make me uneasy. After a few minutes of driving and freaking out, we got to my family's house. I sprint up the walkway and closed the door behind me, locking it. My dog, a Mastiff/Pit mix, greeted me, and I quickly made sure every window and door in the house was shut, locked, and, if possible, barred shut. Then I went to my room, making sure my dog came with me. Despite his intimidating appearance, my dog was generally a big teddy bear and not particularly ferocious. However, he had a strong protective instinct and once prevented me from walking into an ambush by a mountain lion, which I only realized the next day, though that's another story altogether. Point being, my dog was a good protector and would warn me of any trouble. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning I crashed and woke up after about an hour and went about my day, a little bit groggier than I would have liked to be, but generally not letting the previous night bother me. This is typically where I end the story, at least most of the time I tell it. The last part of what happened isn't something most people need or should know, in my opinion. About a week later I was asleep when my dog woke me up, growling at the big window in my room. I assumed he was growling at my fish tank's filter or something, which he had done when I first put the tank in, and waited maybe 15 minutes until he stopped growling, then went back to sleep. The next morning I woke up and checked my room. Maybe a rat had gotten in the walls, or there had been a bat or something outside. What I saw on my window made me feel like I'd be doused with ice water. There was a large handprint on my window, right in the center, overlooking the part of the freeway where I'd seen the man on the side of the road. The handprint was at least another half a hand larger than mine and up higher than I or any of my family could reach without a step stool or stepping a couple rungs up on a ladder. Had he found my house? Was my family in danger? Luckily for now at least, the second question was answered. Nothing bad or strange has befallen my family since then, and so far nothing has. And about a week and a half later, I went back to college and was no longer in town for this crazy ducker to stalk, so hopefully he lost interest in my family's house since then. Still, this is one of the 2 scariest and most unnerving things to ever happen to me, and I hope it remains so, and nothing like this ever happens to me again. I think what scares me most about this experience is the lack of context for what I saw and my lack of understanding afterwards. I'll never know why this guy was by the side of the road, and I'll never know if it was his handprint on my window, and if it was, why he'd chosen me to follow and observe. That lack of information is what scares me. Story of something big that reflects. I was probably 15 or late 14 at the time, in the middle of summertime. My 2 friends and I left a girl's house late at night, essentially sneaking out. She lived deep in the countryside, about a 45-minute walk to get to the city line. We left about 2 in the morning. I and my 2 friends stepped out of her country subdivision road onto a main paved country road. We took a left onto the main road. We looked on our right, you could basically see just road and woods in each direction with some mailboxes. But on the right side, in our opposite direction, at the top or end of our view on the road, we could see just a white light or reflector, imagine. Obviously, that didn't cross our minds. Our focus was on avoiding detection by law enforcement or any activity beyond curfew. We walked left, the opposite direction. As we were walking, Cars occasionally drove by, so to be safe, we would hide in the woods or tree line from every passing car just in case it was a cop. Every time we would watch a car go by in our opposite traveling direction, basically we would look back, and the white object was getting closer quite fast. You could only see the object when the headlights were on. Once the headlights disappeared, it was essentially invisible. We continued walking, all seeing it, just confused but didn't care to wait. As we approached the town line, the creature was likely only 200 to 500 feet behind us again. We could only see it in passing headlights, none of the cars seemed to notice. When the creature was close enough, it had translucent white skin with big black hole eyes and long limbs that looked pretty skinny but still could have been anywhere between 6 and 8, maybe more, feet. We get to the start of town with house subdivision streets, basically townhomes. Every four-way we got to, on our left, looking at a four-way, our opposite block street over, we could see the thing walking with our pace. When I got a side view of it, I noticed its arms hung down pretty low. It seemed as though it was looking at us, but it actually wasn't. My friends and I weren't on any drugs that night, and we often snuck outside after dark, so it wasn't merely a case of fear or mistake. We were pretty, I guess, calm or casual because we kept our distance. We were about in town and more worried about ourselves getting caught by the law. To this day I still ride my bike around town at night and have for years. I haven't seen anything at night like that since or before. I sometimes wonder if what I saw was just a trick of my vision, but both of my friends also witnessed it, and I have seen it 3 more times at different intersections without using headlights. It was a gray, kind of cloudy night. Any help with what I might have seen? Was it a coyote or something far more sinister? So in 2015 I made a self-funded trip to St. Louis, Missouri, to visit my cousin, who lived with her husband for 5 weeks. I'm from Australia, and this was my first ever trip overseas. Though I was 18 and female, I have plenty of common sense, so my parents trusted me to make the trip, which included a 16-hour flight across the Pacific and a 5-hour stopover at Dallas Airport alone. All of these tasks I did with relative ease. The stay at my cousin's was great. We saw the St. Louis sights, and I particularly enjoyed visiting the national parks, being a nature-oriented person myself and very good with animals. This is important to my encounter, as I am able to identify animals on site due to a childhood interest in reading books about animals around, so I know a lot of the morphology of different animals. Anyway, one night my cousin decided to take me to a famous ice cream parlor, whose name I can't remember, but it is really well known and kind of set up like a kiosk. To get there, we had to drive 20 minutes. It was my cousin and her husband in the front, with me and their 2 young children in the back. As we drove, we passed through an area that was lit by street lamps but very deserted. To visualize this part of the road, it was split into 2 parts, with a median strip separating the 2 opposing flows of traffic. On our side of the road were residential houses, and on the other side was a large storm drain that was once a river. There is a large grassy and treed area on the riverside that separates it from the road, which has multiple streetlights. It was a rather windy night too, as it was autumn, fall, at the time. I have always loved looking out the window at night while driving, and at this point I was looking out the window across from me, which meant I was looking across the 2 little kids. We were traveling slowly, probably about 80 kilometers per hour, 50 miles per hour, so I got a good look at the trees in the median strip. As we neared the next light, I saw what I thought was a coyote, just standing underneath the street light. The night was so dark around the light, so it really illuminated the canine. I was excited. This was my first larger American animal. In Australia, we don't have wolves or coyotes, only feral dogs, foxes, and dingoes, which don't live near me. I didn't point it out to everyone else in the car because as we got closer, I realized it was too big to be a coyote. It was more the size of a wolf, but its characteristics were those of a coyote, pointed face and longer tail. It didn't look like a dog, it had a wild gray brindle coat and thick hackles that were raised along its back. Though it showed no other sign of distress, it just stood under the light with its head lowered. But the thing that kept me quiet was the fact that it was staring directly at me. Not at the car, not at anyone else in the car, but at me. Our eyes were locked, and I realized that its eyes were yellow, like a bright, lamp-like yellow. It didn't frighten me but made me incredibly uncomfortable, like I had a sudden rush of adrenaline as soon as our eyes made contact. I felt like prey. We passed the beast, and it continued to stare at me as we drove by. Looking over my shoulder confirmed that it was still looking at me. The strange thing was, aside from its head, the coyote hadn't moved, not a leg, not even its coat in the wind. As we got further down the road, I asked if anyone had seen it, to which the answer was no. I found that odd, as it was so noticeable under the street light. Anyway, we got the ice cream, with me thinking about the coyote the whole time, and as we headed home along the same road, I looked for it but couldn't see it. I paid no mind after I couldn't see it again, but a strange thing happened later that night. At around 4 a.m. I awoke feeling terrified in my bed. I remained perfectly still with little breathing. I do this when I'm frightened in bed. It was utterly silent, like not even normal night noises that you would expect in town, and then suddenly there was a giant bang, and I heard a car alarm going off and later ambulance lights. It turns out there was a car crash just outside my cousin's house. We asked around and found out that the driver had swerved to avoid a large animal and hit a power pole. No one could identify the animal. I wonder if it was my coyote? And if so, did it follow me? I know about stories of skinwalkers, but that is in the southwestern USA, not Missouri. I have always been sensitive to supernatural things, and I got an unnatural vibe from that coyote, and that feeling of terror before the car crash was queer. I also know that my cousin's husband is Native American heritage. What was under that street lamp that night? An experience I had today. So this may be nothing, but I thought I would share it. Southern Ontario, Canada. I was driving home with my wife. We were coming up to a roundabout and slowing down. There is a turn to the left and a turn to the right, but directly ahead there is only an entrance to a little lot owned by the region where region vehicles and wildlife vehicles can access to get down to a large river. This area is right on the edge of the country. There are not insanely built up forests or anything, but there are a lot of woods around. Behind the lot there is a large hill, and on that hill is woods. I would estimate that the woods are about 40 feet deep and 200 feet long, filled with very large maple and oak trees. As we are slowing down, there is nobody else in sight. It is a Saturday afternoon in the country, so there is not a lot of traffic in general and none at the roundabout. My wife and I are talking when we see what I can only describe as a bunch of trees being ripped out of the ground and tossed over. I stopped at the roundabout and just watched as, like, 4 or 30 mature, large trees were just ripped over. It wasn't like a tree simply falling down, it was as if something had run through the woods, shaking several trees and uprooting some of them. All of them fell within 8 seconds of each other. It wasn't like one tree got ripped up and, 8 seconds later, another. In total, all the trees were uprooted within 8 seconds. Do you know when you watch a video clip of something running through a forest, causing trees to fall wildly as it crashes through? It was like that, but a number of trees came down. It was like 28 degrees Celsius outside, lovely and warm, so I had all the windows down. I did not hear anyone with a chainsaw, any motor, or anyone with an axe chopping anything. No noise at all. I was also not listening to the radio and just talking to my wife at the time, and we stopped talking the second we saw the trees going crazy and before the 4 trees were ripped up. I also was driving a hybrid in EV mode, so no engine noises or anything to overwhelm or drown out the sounds of any machinery. I grew up on a farm and have cut down many trees, including large 60-foot pine trees. So I know what it looks like, sounds like, and acts like when a tree is cut down. This was nothing like that. My wife even said, "Holy shit. Did you see that? It was like a monster." Now at the time I didn't ask her to elaborate on what she saw. I was assuming she was just referring to the trees moving like crazy and then being ripped up/knocked over. Now that I think about it, she might have seen something, and I will talk to her tomorrow when she wakes up to see if she actually saw a monster or not. Later, she said it was not a monster. Her exact words were, "It's like a giant was running through the trees," but she did not see anything. She was just saying it was like that. Aside from some UFO sightings during my childhood in the country, I have never heard anyone discuss or experience anything like this before. It was very odd and shocking to witness. I have never heard of Bigfoot ever being in southern Ontario, especially the area I live in. I mean, like 5 minutes from there is a grocery store, even with it being at the edge of town. However, there are a ton of crops coming in at this time of year, including literal tons and tons of corn, wheat, soybeans, and stuff like that. So within a 10-minute walk, there would be a lifetime of food for something that big. Any ideas? Sorry if this is dumb. I thought it was important to share. Spirits followed me home after riding in the bush. So my partner saw a medium today and has stated that I bring spirits back with me every time I come home from camping. Now I don't go out camping, but I go out often riding my dirt bike in a fairly rural area. It's incredibly open. Not knowing much on the spiritual plane, can they come from anywhere and gather? As I've been closed off now to being able to sense spirits around for the last few years, that is, I'm not as paranoid anymore. She made the comment that I had 2 with me almost all the time, and because we have 2 young boys, they stay and chat with them, but it means they're waking up in the night. Does anyone have any knowledge on this level? I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and that's why I haven't shared about it yet, but I can't seem to get it off of my mind, and I wonder if anybody has any information or similar experiences. I was out in Long Island, New York, around the beginning of the new year, 2022, when I went out for a late-night drive with two friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house when we started feeling a really heavy presence surrounding us as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end, so we had to go back. As we drove down the road that felt menacing, we passed a cemetery that had two beings that appeared to be humans standing in robes facing a statue of the Blessed Mother and waving a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove into the gate and parked a few feet away from them, who appeared to be statues at first, but then, without even moving, they had started facing us and waving the wand over us. Their faces looked largely expressionless but also had features that I can only describe as a mix between a witch and a pig. My friend that was driving took off, and we started to head home, all feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we realized that we were told to go back in the same direction as the GPS rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not go back, but we all returned home and felt sick all night. Some time had passed, and I told another friend of mine about this experience, and he said he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went, and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and left. Later that night, while he was home alone with his girlfriend, they both heard what sounded like something running up to the door and violently slamming against it, which also caused some items on the shelves to fall down. However, when they searched the house, they found nobody there. I can't find any information on anything like this, and I'm very tempted to go back, but I can't get myself to actually do it just yet out of fear and lack of understanding. Riverdale Road. I really wasn't looking forward to living at my parents' house this summer, but I had nowhere else to go, as I'm in transition between the dorm and my place. Lease starts in August. Oh well, it's only for 3 months, I'm that much closer to my summer job, and I get to see my friends that I left behind when I went to college. One particular night, two friends of mine, we'll call them Colt and Levi, and I decided to go cruise around Thornton, Colorado, and just have an adventure of sorts. We began making our way towards the more rural part of Thornton just as it was getting dark when we came across a nice country road, Riverdale Road. There weren't many houses along the road, and hardly any cars, so we decided to cruise it and smoke some trees. We pulled onto a side road that was downright creepy. Looking down it, we saw that where it turns to dirt, it was completely framed in by trees. It was like looking down a long, dark, narrow tunnel, only it was made of enormous cottonwoods. We followed the road to where the tunnel ends abruptly and turns into a huge, flat field and eventually ended up at an intersection. The road split 3 ways, and all around this intersection, in the field, were tons of junk cars, old construction equipment, and what looked like a 1970s vintage fire truck that was split in half. It gave all 3 of us a very eerie vibe. It was unusually dark and quiet, and we all got the feeling that we weren't alone. We concluded it was just the trees we smoked, called it a night, and went home. I was intrigued by Riverdale Road, and I still can't put my finger on it, but I wanted to go back. The next day at work, I did a little research on it and discovered it was considered one of the most haunted roads in the area. It has quite some history, and people have reported seeing a little girl, a woman in a white dress, and large hairless dogs that had been titled hellhounds. Now I'm not a big believer in ghosts or the supernatural, but the stories were quite spooky, and I had to see for myself. I informed Colt and Levi of my findings, and we decided to go back out there later that week. 2 nights later, Colt, Levi, and another friend of ours, let's call her Lisa, waited until it was nice and dark, around 11 p.m., and set off for Riverdale armed with nothing but a camera, snacks, and cigarettes. We were planning on staying out for a while even though I had work early the next morning. I didn't care. Since I've been working full-time, I felt it would be nice to have an adventurous night out. We drove Riverdale up and back twice and saw nothing but a few other cars. We found the dirt road we had previously been to but mutually agreed we didn't want trespassing tickets. While researching Riverdale, I learned it was heavily patrolled by cops and that the dirt road was on the property of a biosecure dairy farm, so we stayed on the main road. We found another dirt road that branches off of Riverdale called Yosemite Street that isn't private property, so we changed course. Once we got onto Yosemite, that's when things started to get spooky. We decided that driving around, we weren't going to experience the most haunted road in Thornton to its fullest potential, so once on Yosemite, we pulled over, opened the windows, and turned off my truck. Big mistake. Levi and I lit up cigarettes, and we talked amongst ourselves for all of about 60 seconds. It started with a metal clanking sound. It started very soft, as if someone was gently tapping a hammer against a metal tank or a pot in a consistent, rhythmic way. It began to grow louder and transformed into a sound that could be described as someone rapping on sheet metal with a short length of chain. It got our attention but didn't really scare us. We just assumed it was some oil equipment at work out in the field somewhere. The air grew very thick, and a gentle but very chilly breeze began to fill my truck. Not 10 seconds later, all of us heard very heavy footsteps scuff right past the driver's side of the truck. That did get our attention. They couldn't have been but a few feet off to the side, but none of us saw anyone. The footsteps paced back and forth past the truck several times. We were all genuinely creeped out at this point, and Lisa suggested we take a few pictures of our dark surroundings and take off. We all agreed. As we frantically looked around for the camera, a slow, soft noise started to surround us. It was very calming at first, but as it got louder, it became absolutely terrifying. I can only describe it as a heartbeat, which sounded as it would if it were playing through subwoofers. Two problems though: my truck doesn't have subs, and it was turned off. The sound was maddening. It grew louder and louder and beat faster and faster. Duck this. We're leaving. I jammed the keys in the ignition and twisted as hard as I could. Nothing. The truck was not starting. We had been only sitting for a few minutes, so the battery couldn't possibly be dead. The clanking, footsteps, and heartbeat seemed to form into one harmonious, menacing sound, and we were all hearing it. We had to get out of there. I just saw something out there, Colt said in a despairing undertone. I believed him. I didn't need to look to know there was something out there. I didn't want to look. I was trying desperately to get the truck started when flashes filled the inside of the truck. I realized it was Lisa who had found the camera and was shooting pictures. The third picture she took briefly illuminated the area in front of us. That's when we saw her. All four of us. In the split second the flash lit everything up. We saw a woman wearing a white full-length dress standing not 10 feet off the front bumper. Her skin was very pale, she had long wiry brown hair, and her eyes, I'll never forget them. They were all black and appeared to be sucked back into her face. She had a very sad, pained look about her. While it was a terrifying sight to see, I couldn't help but have pity for whatever or whoever she was. As soon as we saw her, the night air became quiet, still, and warm. The truck started right up without hesitation, and the headlights only illuminated a stretch of dirt road before us. She was gone. I gunned it, and we returned to Riverdale, our only way back. Upon going through the pictures later, they were just pictures of the dirt road we were parked on. Not a single one captured the woman. Back on Riverdale, we were making our way to the northern end of the road so that we could head west and go home. We came up to a corner that had some trees on either side of the road, making it tough to see very far off the road, especially in the dark. As I rounded the corner, just feet in front of my truck, a little girl wearing a blue sundress darted out from the trees. Lisa screamed, I slammed on the brakes, and the ABS fought back aggressively as the tires squealed. It was no use. I heard the empty thud as my bumper connected with the side of her head at 35 miles per hour. I pulled over, and we all bailed out of the truck as fast as our bodies would allow us. This time I left the truck running. We searched in the road, off both sides of the road, and under the truck, but she was nowhere to be found. Looking at the bumper of the truck, there was no sign of an impact. No blood, no dent, nothing. The street was free of any such signs as well. I felt a familiar feeling of dread as I heard the heartbeat begin. We ignored it this time and kept looking. We felt the truck hit that girl and heard the thud. There's no way we imagined it all. We heard the giggle of a little girl but couldn't figure out where it was coming from. The heartbeat and giggling immediately stopped when we saw headlights round the corner, and we felt a satisfying relief when blue and red lights appeared above those headlights. The officer asked us what the hell we were doing. We told him everything about the little girl, how we were sure we hit her but couldn't find her. We described to him what she looked like, all the color drained out of his face, and he said very seriously that we had to go home. Yes, sir. Upon our arrival at my house, we got out and immediately agreed that we would never return there unless we absolutely had to and that we would never tell anyone else about what happened. Once we had this agreement in order, we went back to the truck to retrieve Levi's hookah and wind the night down in my backyard. When we returned to the truck, we saw what was perhaps the most horrifying part of it all. There were small handprints in the dust all over the truck. Literally dozens of them, if not hundreds, all over the doors, hood, windows, etc. The handprints were maybe half the size of any of ours. They were unmistakably those of a child. I never liked driving home at night. I live in a subdivision off of a fairly busy road, but at night, it's not so busy and quite dark. There really aren't enough streetlights, and that's always bothered me. And I wouldn't consider myself afraid of the dark any more than the average person, but I mean, who likes the dark? When I find myself driving home at night, there's a certain section of road that makes me feel increasingly uneasy, sometimes to the point where I turn the light on inside of my car. Before you ask, no, I haven't really felt this unease during the daytime, and yes, I've questioned whether it's just the dark that makes me feel this way. It's not. One night, I was driving home from my store. When I reached the darkest part of the road, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A large, dark shadow was in the seat next to me. Good grief. You're such a baby. I told myself I was seeing things and was just scared of the dark. My sweaty hands gripped the steering wheel, my jaw tensed, and I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't turn on the light. As I got closer to my subdivision, something pulled on my arm. Stop, I said. My mouth went dry, a heaviness pressed in on my chest, and I felt like I was being choked. My throat was closing up. Leave, I spat out. In Jesus' name. I no longer felt the heaviness in my chest or the tightness in my throat, but I couldn't stop shaking. When I got home and calmed down, I texted my mom and told her about it. I promise I'm not crazy, I said. She didn't think I was. She told me to research the area and see what I could find, so I did. I looked for information about deaths in the area, murders, car wrecks, etc. I looked at police reports and public records. The only thing I found was a domestic dispute arrest at a house nearby. I talked with a few trusted people about my experience. A friend of mine said she'd walk the road with me, during the day, of course, and pray over it. I wasn't really up for that, but I did pray while driving, and I tried to pay more attention to the area during the day to see if I picked up on anything. I remembered that this stretch of road was notorious for crappy cell service. I'd frequently have dropped calls and no signal, and sometimes the Bluetooth system in my car would stop working. I assumed it was interference from the wooded areas or power lines, but I wasn't so sure anymore. I tried my best not to drive at night for a while, but I couldn't avoid it forever, and I once again found myself on that road at nighttime. I was listening to praise and worship music on the drive home, and I felt prompted to find a specific song. As I drove down the road, I sang at the top of my lungs, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear. As I sang, I felt the dark presence enter my car once again. But this time I refused to be afraid. I blasted my music and sang louder. I sang those words to Jesus over and over, and I finally felt the darkness leave. It's been months since this happened. The woods in this area have been cleared to make way for more housing developments. They've added more streetlights as well. I haven't felt that presence again. I saw something in my father's car. Twice. This happened a long time ago, but the memory of it is still burned into my memory. I was young enough to still be sitting in those booster seats you put your child in with the tray attachment for food. I was playing with a little toy car in the back seat of an old 1988 Honda Civic in my little car seat. We were on the road when suddenly, slowly, a shadowy figure crossed over in front of me. The best way I can describe it is that it was shaped like one of those Pac-Man ghosts, but black and with a pair of human-like eyes. No other facial features. It was small enough to fully fit on my kiddie tray thing I was using as a race car track for my toy as it passed in front of me. Even then, I remember being freaked out since nothing in the car even remotely looked like that, nor could anything have reflected a shadow to look like what I had just seen. Of course, I immediately told my parents, who just simply brushed it off and didn't believe me. Even now, as I think of it more and more, I still cannot explain it. The second time I saw it was a while later. I can't remember how much later, but I know I had outgrown the booster seat but was still sitting in the back of the car. I was climbing into the back seat of that car when I saw it again. Only this time, it was on the seats and much bigger than before. Tall enough to cover the whole middle seat in its shadow. It was positioned almost as if it was looking out from behind the shadow being cast by the driver's seat, and only one I showed this time. I lost my shit and quickly ran from that car to my parents' confusion. Now I knew this couldn't possibly be a shadow being cast from something already in the car. When I finally worked up the courage to look again with my parents, it was gone. To this day, I haven't had any paranormal encounter nearly as weird as that one. I am not one to believe in ghosts or spirits, but even I can't begin to explain what it was I saw then. That was the last time I saw that ghost, and shortly after, my father gave away that car to a friend of his. I don't know if ghosts can haunt cars, but if they can, that car was for sure haunted. I teleported while driving on a familiar highway. I've been saving this story to myself for 3 weeks. I don't understand why I didn't immediately reach out to anybody. Maybe because I knew they'd think I was crazy, but I know what I saw. Let's begin. I'm an Uber driver in upstate NY. We just got Uber here about a month and a half ago, and I'm in between real jobs at the moment, so I figured I'd try that out and make some quick money ride sharing. One of the Uber hotspots in my area is Saratoga, especially on the weekends. Rides back home could cost $40, and when there's surge pricing I can make 2-3x extra for the same trip, so I decided to DD for my friends in Saratoga one weekend. They partied, and I made money. Sounded good to me. Around 2:30 a.m. I picked up a drunk girl whose friends abandoned her. She needed to get to Troy. Since I needed to pick up my friends around 4 a.m., I felt confident about having enough time, and because it was surge pricing, I was happy to drive pretty much anywhere. She sat in the front seat, and we were talking for a little bit, but she quickly passed out. Guess I'm not the best conversationalist. I follow my Uber GPS to her destination and take 87 south. Now here's where it gets spooky. I was kind of zoning out for a while on the road. Not dozing off or anything, just sort of mindlessly driving. It was a beautiful summer night, and there wasn't a car on the road, so I played some of my favorite music at a reasonable volume and let my cruise control do the rest. At one point I looked to see what exit we are at. Exit 8. Oh wow, I think to myself, making excellent time. I look at my GPS, 19 minutes to her destination. I think nothing of it. Until, that is, I pass the next exit. Exit 10. I freeze. Confused, I look down at my GPS, and I physically see the time drop from 19 minutes to 13 minutes. I couldn't believe it. I kept driving, but the GPS time wouldn't move. It just stayed at 13 minutes. I wanted to wake up my passenger and ask if she noticed anything strange, but I know that wouldn't have ended well. So I just kept driving. After exit 10, it went to exits 9E and 9 watts, and then, I shit you not, the exact same exit 8 I saw 10 minutes prior. Not just the same number 8. The same exit. Even though I was passively driving, I distinctly remember the slight upward slant of the exit. After I drove past exit 8 the second time, my GPS unfroze after 13 minutes and resumed normal. After I dropped her off, I quickly drove back up 87 north to meet my friends, all with one thing on my mind: what the duck just happened? Now I'm going through my head. Maybe because it was dark out, I saw the 11 merge together looking like an 8? Possibly, but I wasn't tired. It was late, but I got a great nap in before I drove that night and had a huge espresso coffee around midnight. I felt awake. I stopped myself from overreacting so I could pick up my friends and act normally. After I finally got them in the car, I drove back down 87 south with only one thing in mind. Exit 11. As I'm driving past exit 12, I try to recreate the driving scenario I was in when I passed exit 11. Middle lane, 72 cruise control, no high beams. I pass exit 11, semi-squinting to see if I could have mistaken the number, but as I'm doing that, my eyes shoot wide open. Not only did the 11 look nothing like an 8, but also exit 11 looked absolutely nothing like exit 8, which I saw twice. The curve was off, it didn't go uphill. It was an entirely different exit. That was the real exit 11. I keep driving. Exit 10, exits 9E and 9 watts, and yes, exit 8. The same exit I saw for the third time that night looked exactly as I had, unfortunately, expected it to. I had since tried to convince a couple of my friends of what I had experienced, but to no avail. I know this all sounds crazy, but all I can say is that I know what I saw, and I will never forget that night for the rest of my life. Also, sorry if this story seemed jumbled, I'm getting nauseous recounting it all. Followed down a dark country road. Last year, I, 18F, was living in a very rural town in the middle of the mountains. Most small western towns only have one road that goes into the big city. Our road in particular was about 50 miles of empty highway, surrounded only by cliffs, fields, and occasionally a farm. At the very entrance to this road, once you enter the city, is a huge truck stop/gas station that is always packed. My mom and I were going back home after a midnight showing of whatever movie we had decided to see, and, as usual, we stopped to fill up on gas and get a drink for the long drive. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy older Jeep pull out at the same time we did, but of course, I didn't take much notice of it. It wasn't weird that someone would be leaving at the same time as us. As we started down the pitch-black road, the Jeep kept a steady pace behind us, again not weird, until it came flying up past us before disappearing behind a hill. Mom and I just scoffed. We were going 60, but when people knew the roads well, they often drove them at close to 100, even at night. Eventually, we came up to the Jeep from before. It was pulled over, but the back half of the vehicle was in the road, and what was clearly a man's arm was waving out the window, gesturing for us to pull over. Of course, we pass it. The man flies past us once more and pulls over again. He does this once more, and my mom and I begin to get very nervous. After passing him for the third time, he flies up and begins tailgating us. He's driving so close that we can't see his headlights in the rearview mirror, and he's honking his horn every so often, waving his arm for us to pull over. He carries on with this for 30 minutes. Mom and I are terrified. She's white-knuckling the wheel, I'm holding a pocket knife to make myself feel better. I swore at my mom for the first time that night, begging her, "Don't you ducking dare pull over." If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that is all that was going through my mind. The road is a dead zone for service, so we couldn't call the police or anyone. The picture of us dead or worse on the side of the empty road was the only thing I could think about. But, as soon as it had started, it ended. The man slammed on his brakes, turned around, and went back. The ride home was silent, and I ended up sleeping in my mom's room out of fear. The next morning we had a discussion and came to the conclusion he had seen two lone women traveling at night and thought we'd be easy pickings, which he would have been right about. Some people suggest that he had seen us drop money or a receipt at the gas station and wanted to be a good Samaritan. I think that's ridiculous. Nobody following two women home in such an aggressive manner has good intentions. We moved out of town a few months later for unrelated reasons, but just before we did, the same car was reported following a group of 4 men on their way to work. So, maybe he just likes to scare people. Either way, that night was easily one of the scariest of my life. The impossible. In 2012, I was working as the lead diagnostics technician at an automotive shop in Fremont. It was a typical day, and my shift started at 7 a.m. sharp. I parked across the street and walked into the shop to greet my boss when my phone rang. The call brought devastating news. My grandfather had just passed away in the hospital. Overwhelmed, I quickly said hi and bye to my boss and headed straight home. Days earlier, strange events began unfolding. It was a Saturday, and my dad and I were working at our house. Throughout the day, peculiar things happened. One incident involved a garage light that repeatedly turned itself on, even after we made certain it was switched off. We would leave the garage only to return and find the light inexplicably lit again. Later that same day, my dad received mysterious text messages from an unknown number with a 209 area code. The message urgently read, "Mi jefe está muy malo. You need to come now." Alarmed, we quickly packed up and headed to pick up my sister, and then all drove together to Manteca in my parents' Honda Civic. During the drive, my dad received additional messages, including one that asked, "Are you getting my messages?" My dad replied, "Yes." Upon our arrival, we discovered that none of my uncles had sent those texts, and none had recently changed their phone numbers. Days later at the hospital, my sister went through my dad's phone to find the conversation had inexplicably vanished. My dad never deleted messages. After my grandfather's passing, my family gathered at my grandmother's house in Manteca, where the atmosphere was heavy with grief. Hours later, my dad suggested we head back home to prepare a room for my grandma to stay with us. Upon our agreement, my sister, my girlfriend at the time, and I climbed into my sister's 2012 Honda Civic. My sister drove, I sat in the front passenger seat, and my girlfriend sat behind my sister. My parents followed closely behind in their own Civics. As we drove down a quiet street, I noticed a rosary hanging from my sister's rearview mirror, knotted tightly. I casually asked her, "Why do you tie the rosary in such a tight knot?" She responded, "I don't like it dangling too low when I drive." Not thinking much of it, I returned to scrolling through my phone. We approached a red light, preparing to turn left onto the freeway. Suddenly, my sister screamed. I barely had time to look up from my phone before blinding headlights filled my vision. An oncoming Volkswagen, traveling at nearly 60 miles per hour, swerved into our lane, barreling head-on toward our stationary car. The impact was immediate and fierce. My parents, who witnessed everything from behind, later recounted how the collision was so intense it lifted our car's rear wheels off the ground and threw us completely out of our lane. Inside the car, everything turned smoky, and my ears rang painfully. A giant check engine light blinked furiously on the dashboard. In the stunned silence following the crash, I opened my eyes and saw 3 rosary beads resting in my lap. My heart sank. I thought to myself, "Oh no, Stephanie's rosary broke." My memory at this point becomes hazy, but I distinctly recall a woman dressed entirely in white scrubs, like a nurse, opening my passenger door and calmly instructing us to move quickly to safety across the street. According to my parents, however, there was no woman in white, we simply walked across the street on our own. Shaken and injured, my family frantically checked each other's injuries. I had a fractured sternum, My sister suffered 2 broken heels, and my girlfriend had internal bruising. Despite the severity of the crash, we had survived. As we stood waiting for the ambulance, my mother's eyes narrowed curiously as she pointed to my back pocket. "What's that sticking out of your pocket?" she asked, puzzled. Confused, I reached behind me, feeling something solid. Carefully, I pulled it out. My heart skipped a beat. In my hand was my sister's rosary, completely intact. The very same rosary I'd seen tied tightly to the rearview mirror, the same one I thought had shattered moments earlier. Somehow, impossibly, it had ended up safely tucked into my back pocket. To this day, none of us can explain how it happened, nor did we ever see the woman in white again. But deep down, I believe someone, or something, was watching over us that day. The Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. I consider myself a skeptical person, and while fascinated by the paranormal, I truly believe there are reasonable explanations for strange phenomena. Once I thought I saw a UFO over East Lake Tahoe, but upon further investigation I realized it was a meteor shower, and the space rocks had iron in them, giving off a green glow. Another time I thought my house was haunted only to discover it was merely a squirrel in my crawl space and the neighbor's dog taking things from my yard. I am not superstitious, though I like to read about superstitions as great stories, and I firmly believe in a scientific approach to explain things. Nevertheless, I have still had an encounter that I cannot find any reasonable explanation for. I believe that at the time, I took the appropriate steps to seek a rational explanation. 2 years later, I still have not thought of a rational explanation. This encounter frequently occupies my mind because it occurred on a route I continue to drive today. It was September 2019 when I encountered what I have since dubbed the Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. I spotted this creature not just once but on 2 separate occasions about a week apart. To give you some context, at the time I was working a closing shift at a call center in Orlando, meaning I'd get off around midnight and make it to St. Cloud around 12:45/1 am. At the time I had a wonderful German Shepherd Husky mix named Rex, who has since passed away, but I would leave him with my parents, who live off Old Canoe Creek, while I was at work. After work I'd stop at my parents' and pick him up, then I'd drive down Old Canoe Road and cross 192 to the state streets, where I'd turn left onto 10th Street towards my house, a few blocks from Lakeview Elementary. I've lived in St. Cloud all my life. I've driven this route countless times before and countless times since. It was closer to 2 a.m. on the night I first saw the Shadow Hound. I got stuck on a particularly long call and was late getting off work. I just picked up Rex from my parents and turned off Vermont onto 10th. Between Dakota and California Avenue, there is an alleyway between the houses. The properties on both sides have large and solid fences. Occasionally I see a truck or random car parked in there. There is a bus stop bench at the corner entrance to the alley with a street lamp that's well lit. Across from the alleyway is an empty lot with a large tree towards the back corner but otherwise a very wide open field. In other words, this was a well-lit area with not many options for an animal to scamper off to without me seeing where they went. As I'm driving down the road, I see a large black dog standing in the middle of 10th Avenue completely illuminated by a halo of light from the street lamp. My headlights reflected off the dog's eyes, a pale blue-green like a normal dog's, nothing eerie like red eyes glowing like embers of hellfire. With the street lamp and my headlights, I was able to get a good look at the creature. Now I'm a dog lover and a member of several local pet groups, and my first job out of high school was at a pet store here in St. Cloud back in 2013, so I know a thing or two about dogs, which is why I noticed so many details about what it looked like. It looked like a mastiff of some sort, looking almost like Fang from the Harry Potter franchise, a Neapolitan mastiff, but its wrinkles and jowls weren't quite as prominent. Perhaps it had some bully breed in it or was a cane corso, another mastiff with slightly less prominent cheek flaps. When I say it was a black hound, I don't mean it was as if oil or pure shadow coalesced into the form of a dog. There was nothing quite so poetic or paranormal about it. Instead, it was a rather mundane black dog. The dog had fur that was either dark gray, brown, or possibly brindle, which appeared black in the night but still showed texture in the pale orange light of the street lamp. A regular dog. At this point nothing seemed paranormal to me. Sure, there was fog coming out of his mouth, but it was a cold night in September, and there was fog coming out of my mouth too, with every breath. I thought it was someone's lost dog. Its ears were not trimmed, and its tail was not docked, but it also was not skinny as if it were a stray. It was very muscular and well-fed but not obese. Having a close bond with my own dog, I know I'd be upset had it been my dog, so I intended to try and coax the dog into my van so I could find its owners. Whatever its breed was, a dog of this size would be expensive even if not pedigree, therefore, I was sure they'd want it back. The dog was larger than Rex, who at the time was 65 pounds, so I'd estimate this dog was anywhere between 85 and 100 pounds, which means that getting an unfamiliar dog of that size into the car with my own dog would be risky. Rex was a great dog and got along with anyone. The only time he ever became aggressive was if another dog initiated the conflict, and even then he'd only defend himself or me. If Rex didn't feel threatened by this hound, then I knew the dog was not dangerous. I looked over at Rex, sitting in my passenger seat, to see how he was reacting to the dog. He clearly knew the dog was there. It was not a figment of my imagination. He was making soft vocalizations, not growls but more of low-tone woofs, as if to say, "Who are you? I don't know you." His hackles were only slightly raised. I knew for him this meant he wasn't angry but more cautious, as if his instincts were telling him to be prepared, but he was still seeing if there was a real threat. His body language told me that he thought this was strange as well, but it wasn't dangerous, so I got out of the car. As I exited my car, I'd lost sight of the dog. At first I thought perhaps he got startled by me and ran off somewhere. I surveyed the area around me. Again, the alleyway had solid fences with no obvious gaps big enough for him to slip through, and across the street was an empty lot with an open field. The only cover in the field was some small shrubs that would never conceal a dog his size and some bushes in the far corner that he wouldn't have been able to make it to in the time I had my eyes off him. I thought he might have run around my car, almost like when dogs are playing tag and they circle around a tree or bush and antagonize another dog to chase them playfully. I walked around my car but still didn't see him. Back at the front of my car, I glance over at Rex, who is also spinning his head around side to side. He was also looking for the hound. He didn't see where it had run off to when I got out of the car. Rex's ears were down and his eyes were wide. He was very confused and didn't understand what was going on. I got on my hands and knees to take one last look under my car to see if maybe I saw his paws on the other side of the car, but there was nothing. It was a quiet night. I didn't hear any panting or the rustle of the dry September grass crunching under his paws or the clacking of his nails against the pavement or gravel of the alleyway. Wherever the dog was, he was long gone from us. I got back into my car. Still perplexed, I continued to believe that there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps he was in better shape than I thought he was, or maybe I don't know how fast dogs can really move or how stealthy they can be. It seemed odd to me, but at this point I just thought, hey, it's 2 a.m., I'm tired after a long shift, and I'm not on top of my game. I turn on my car and start to drive away. Out of the corner of my eye I see the dog in my rearview mirror. Now I'm startled. Like a scene from a Scooby-Doo episode, Rex and I both swing our heads around and look, and sure enough, he's standing there bold as brass. His eyes were reflecting blue-green from my taillights, and there was a red hue from my car cast on him. Rex's hackles are raised fully now, but his vocalizations are still just low growling and soft barks. He is very startled and defensive. Like Scooby to my Shaggy, Rex and I turn to look at each other to confirm we're both seeing the same thing, both our eyes wide, and we're visibly startled. We turn our heads back to the back of our car, and the dog is once again gone. At this point I stop asking questions, I turn myself around as fast as possible, and I drive home with gusto. As I drove away, I saw the dog had returned in the rearview mirror and stayed in the road for as long as I could see him. This is where things took an unexplainable turn. Even though my car was in motion, meaning my brake light wasn't on, and I was moving away from the dog, and even though the only other light source was the street lamp above the dog, his eyes continued to glow blue-green very brightly no matter how far away I got. Finally, after a few blocks, I could no longer see him, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up just like Rex's hackles. When I got home I spent a few hours poring over local Facebook groups trying to see if anyone reported a lost dog matching the description, but I found nothing. I reviewed a bunch of folklore about black dogs, mostly from the UK, and much of it was similar but also very different. Most of the black dog stories involve proximity to a church or graveyard, but the closest church is on Tennessee Avenue, and there's no graveyard adjacent to it. The eyes were blue-green like a normal dog's, not red, and it wasn't being aggressive or intimidating. It was simply disappearing and reappearing mysteriously. Had I not had Rex with me that night, I would have passed this encounter off as a figment of my imagination. I checked around the next day and didn't see anything at the spot. In the following days, I continued to check with local Facebook groups, pet stores, and vet offices to see if anyone had lost a dog matching the description. I talked to a friend of mine who's gone to high school with me here in St. Cloud and who was also very knowledgeable regarding paranormal phenomena, and it puzzled her too since it was so similar yet so different from black dog legends around the world. About 2 weeks passed, and I just started to forget about the encounter when it happened again. The situation was nearly identical, occurring in the same location and under similar circumstances. Rex was with me again, and when the dog appeared in front of us, I looked at Rex and just said, Nope, not today, and I maneuvered my car to the side so I wouldn't hit him but simply went around him, my right tires just barely running over the grass in the empty field/lot across from the alleyway. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was gone again. This was the last time I saw the dog. The encounters were only 2 or so weeks apart, so it's not possible for them to have occurred on nights with full moons both times. This happened in mid and late September, not exactly a period of time associated with paranormal activity, like October, for instance. 2 years have passed, and Rex has also passed on. I now have a brindle black mouth cur puppy named Ahsoka, and with her fur pattern and quiet gait, there have been many occasions where she spooks me because I didn't see her somewhere because the lights were off and she blends into the dark so well. You'd think this makes it seem more familiar and real, as if now that I have a similar dog, I'd realize it was just a normal dog I encountered, but fatigue made me misinterpret the events. But my encounter was different from what I now experience regularly with Ahsoka. If anything, it makes the encounter with the dog more mysterious. This is what led me to finally sit down and write it all out. My memories had become blurry and faded, but I remembered I had messaged the same friend I mentioned above on the day after, recounting the tale in vivid detail about the encounter. I also remembered telling her I saw the dog a second time. I searched through our conversation history and found the messages, cross-referenced to make sure I got the streets right and the encounters laid out right, and wrote this all out. I might not be the only one who has had a similar encounter. Someone listening could say, "Hey, that was when my dog ran away." If that's the case, I want to express that your dog unintentionally frightened me deeply and made me question my experiences. Despite what I believe were the appropriate measures to take to find a reasonable explanation, I still cannot. Perhaps this story will be buried into obscurity, but nevertheless I will always be puzzled by the mysterious Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. Creepy Road. I had a job in another city. I'm from a town, not a city, though my town is now a city. I'm pointing this out because at the time, things were more rural. I secured a job through a close friend, whose 2 older sisters were employed at the same location. They carpooled, alternated weeks of driving, and when I was hired, I was included in the rotation. I spent 1 week driving and 3 weeks not driving. We'd meet at a central area in our small town and proceed from there. I mention this because the number of us varied. Sometimes there were 4, 3, 2, or even just 1 person depending on appointments, when someone left early and drove herself, or holidays. The route, which I refer to as the cut-through, between our town and the highway to work was a rural road. It wasn't a barren rural road. There were houses scattered along the paved road. It was, and still is, winding with small hills and rural, except for one clear, flat stretch. After the last hilly dip there is a library, converted house, and a mom and pop gas station. Neither are decrepit. It's honestly a lovely little village? That would be pushing it. It takes a few miles to get to the library and gas station from either direction, and that's all there is, no other amenities, not even a school. Anyway, after that last small dip, there's a flat expanse, a farmhouse and fields to the right and trees and an embankment to the river, Big River, to the left. The riverside is across the opposite lane, just to make that clear. No barriers, though. Trees and a steep embankment. The river is at the bottom, but there's no way anybody would reach it in a vehicle. Not even a semi-truck. The trees would most likely stop a car at some point from the river, plus there's a landing, ground, at the bottom before the river's edge. The embankment, though, is pretty steep. Someone could easily be killed rolling over, etc. When I was a kid, my mother drove this route thousands of times, back and forth with my sister and me to our trailer. My mother drove this route every weekend from May to late September. Never felt off then. Mind you, as a kid, even as a teen, I was oblivious. Plus my mom was never driving it in the dark. Back to much later in life, the work commute on this road. The flat stretch of the road gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was not the bends or hills at the start or end of the road that frightened me. The small distance, just a few hundred yards, left me feeling uneasy. Just, off. This is the only place/situation in my life where I felt heavy without knowing why. I'd dread that length as an adult. My stomach would fall. Every time. I attributed my dread to the lonely farmhouse. Why? Because it was the only tangible thing on that stretch. Nothing else to the right or left in terms of a house or barn. This farmhouse was pretty and well maintained and occupied, cars in the driveway, but my sense of doom came from it. My intuition was on but out of focus. About 2 to 3 weeks into the commute with my friend and her sisters, we encountered a car that had crashed into a tree. Bear in mind we were on this road from 7 a.m. Monday to Friday, darkness in winter, sunshine in summer. Bright summer daylight, and we encountered a car looking like it drove up a tree. The riverside. No trees on the other, as I mentioned, fields, and yes, cornfields, though they're low in the early summer, plus the one lone farmhouse. The car was resting on its back tires, upright. It didn't appear to be a fatality. The front was crunched in from the impact, but the windshield wasn't broken, nor were any other windows. No occupant that we could see. We all figured a deer darted out and the driver swerved and weirdly wound up there. When we were returning home around 4:20 p.m. that day, there was no evidence of the car. No reports in local newspapers regarding an accident. We all checked. It was a moment of astonishment when the driver managed to walk away. No regular mobiles back then and little internet, but as far as I know, many years later, no one was hurt driving up the tree. I only bring this car incident/accident into play with hindsight. A prelude of things to come. A couple of years after taking this job, one of my friend's sisters retired, and the other wanted to work different hours. It was down to two in commuting, my friend, I'll call her F, and myself. It was my turn to drive one gloomy, snowy, rainy, or slushy winter morning. It was pitch black at 7 a.m. in the winter, which always adds to the fun. Made it through the bendy hills of that rural road, and as soon as I reached the flat part, going very slowly, my car did a 180. I spun around in the opposite direction, across the other lane, and started sliding toward the trees and embankment. I had no control. I couldn't brake or take any action because the car was neither in forward nor reverse gear. The car was careening sideways. Surreal is an overused term, but it was exactly that, surreal. It felt like slow, blurry motion, even though only seconds had passed. I said to my friend, "I'm sorry, F," thinking we were about to tumble down the embankment and stop. My car simply stopped. It was eerie. We were both silent. I was thinking, how did we just stop? We sat there for a few seconds in shock. Then I went to pull away, rattled as shit, and my car was dead. I never turned it off. Dead. The power locks also activated. It was an old car with no automatic locks, and we were locked in. Hand on heart truth. I figured out the locks after a few seconds, but the car still wouldn't start. We walked to the mom and pop gas station, hoping they'd be open soon. They never did open while we huddled in the alcove. F had a cell phone and called her son-in-law to pick us up, which he did, but it took him a long time. After an hour in the cold, sheltered a bit by the storefront, still, we were both shaking. The cold and circumstances. Sil showed up and asked if I wanted him to try and start my car. Yes. Drove to my car and more shock. There it sat perfectly aligned. Like I'd pulled over to park, not spun out of control. The embankment drops about 2 away. Yet my car is immaculately straight. Parked on a dime. We never saw that in the dark, exiting the car. To my surprise, my sister-in-law, Sil, got in, and my car started without any issues. WTH? I had the F drive with me to take her home with her son-in-law following us in case my car died. No problems. After dropping her off, my sister-in-law went on her own way while I headed home. I have never been so tired in my life. I went to bed and slept for hours, despite having been awake for less than 3 hours. The next day, I compared notes with F, and she remembered everything just as I did. She also slept for hours after getting home, even though it was only about 8:30 a.m. when we arrived at our respective houses. I will attribute my experience to being out in the cold for over an hour. I'm not religious at all, but I described it at the time as a divine intervention. It felt as if a huge invisible hand came down and prevented my car from toppling down the embankment. Everything was in slow motion, though it wasn't in reality, just mere seconds and zero control. Yet we abruptly stopped. No jolt. There's nothing on that side of the road to stop for. There was no fencing or even snowbanks present at that time. Nothing. We simply stopped. F agreed 100%, still does, exact same memory. And more. Since she was in the passenger seat, she later told me that she was frantically looking for anything outside her window to stop the car. Nothing. She was bracing herself to go down the embankment. Me too. After this event, I continued to watch the farmhouse closely. A car was up a tree, and my car was almost diving across from this house. I won't keep anybody in suspense, it's not the house. In other words, the house may also play a role, but I'm not certain. What I do know is that the heaviness never left while driving that one stretch. For 5 years, I would tense up whether I was driving to or from that stretch of road, regardless of the time of day. There's more about this road. This journey could potentially lead to a conclusion, at least for me. It's creepy AF, and I have never been on it again since leaving that job 8 to 9 years ago. Thanks for listening.